Its whole body was wrapped in coarse, rock-like blue-gray scales that screamed, "Don't even think about scratching me," at a single glance. 8 thick, muscular legs held up its bloated, heavy frame. Brown bone spines, like jagged crystal growths from underground caverns, ran from the crown of its skull all the way to the tip of its tail. In the middle of the thin mist, its eerie green vertical pupils glowed faintly, like ghostly flames. A petrified lizard, a basilisk. Unlike his previous life's technology-only world, here, size alone was often enough to tell you how dangerous a creature was. But in a true fantasy world of dragons and magic, you could never be sure. That thumb-sized flower fairy dancing in the sunlight might very well be a high-tier professional capable of wiping out a small town. So, to separate all these wildly different monsters and beings, a concept had been created. Challenge level. Roughly speaking, a monster with a challenge level of 1 could be taken down by a fully prepared, well-rested party of 4 level. 1 professionals without casualties. Of course, that was the ideal case. A neat, cold standard used by people in the past to categorize enemies. In reality, things like a monster's growth, current injuries, terrain, ambush tactics, and behavior all heavily affected how dangerous it actually was. For sapient creatures, you also had to consider combat experience against humans and whatever equipment they might have looted. Even so, challenge level was at least a useful reference. For example, the rust monster the half-elf team ran in last night was around challenge level 0.5. The bear goblins that wiped out the stinky fish and shrimp team were about 1. By comparison, the petrified lizard barreling towards Xia Nan right now had a challenge level of 3. It was a monster that, in theory, required a full team of 4 level 3 professionals properly prepared to hunt safely. This hulking, stone-armored demon was born with a terrifying innate ability. Petrification Gaze. Once it activated that power, any creature caught in those ghostly green eyes risked being turned to stone on the spot. Only those with very high physical endurance or an exceptionally strong will could withstand it. With that ability alone, it freely roamed the arid regions it called home. One sweep of its gaze, and the unprepared creatures in its path would become statues. Then the naturally lazy petrified lizard would lumber over, crush those statues with its jaws, and swallow them. Its stomach acid would slowly reverse the petrification, turning the statue back into flesh and blood, ready to be digested. There was no doubt. In his current state, no matter what condition this basilisk was in, if Xianan got close, he was dead. So even though he hadn't actually traded blows with it yet, just seeing Larry turn to stone and watching the half-elf and would immediately retreat was enough to drag him back to his senses. At the moment clarity hit, survival instinct took over. He turned around and sprinted. The beheading longsword he'd just drawn went straight back into its sheath as the trees on both sides blurred past his vision. Xianan pumped his arms with everything he had, long legs hammering against the leaf-covered forest floor. Huff, huff! His breath came in ragged gasps, dizziness pricking at his mind from the rush of adrenaline. Snakes and insects hissed and skittered away from his legs as he crashed through bushes, but he had no attention left to spare for them. He ran deeper and deeper into the forest, and silently prayed that the petrified lizard wouldn't choose him as its target. Unfortunately, Xianan had underestimated the demon's hunger for fresh meat. Watching Xianan and the half-elf flee in opposite directions, the basilisk's ghost-green eyes flickered with something disturbingly close to intelligence. There were more prey on the other side. Yes, but they were faster, and their presence quickly vanished into the tangled forest, making them harder to track. On top of that, there was the emerald barrier that had blocked its petrification gaze just now. Guided by hunting instinct, the massive blue-gray lizard made its choice in an instant. Its 8 thick legs bent slightly. Boom! That bloated body exploded into motion, displaying a brutal force completely at odds with its weight. It charged forward like a stone-plated tank. The tough, thorny shrubs and the fleeing snakes and scorpions beneath its bulk were crushed into pulp. The treetops shook violently as panicked birds flapped twice and then fell from the air as statues. Trunks snapped, grass was flattened. Its path was a straight line of destruction, bits of bark and shredded leaves swirling in the air behind it. Xiaonan felt the ground shudder under his feet. The roaring crash behind him sounded like a train bearing down on his back. His heart hammered wildly. He didn't dare look back. He just poured everything into running faster. But the sharp crack of breaking branches behind him grew clearer and closer with every heartbeat, like the footsteps of death. Finally, a blue-gray shadow flickered at the very edge of his vision. A violent gust of wind, reeking of foul, beastly breath, slammed into him from behind like a hurricane. The jaws that could bite through steel and stone snapped shut. Buzz! The only magic item Xia Nin owned, the deadline ring, activated on its own. Deflection field. Invisible energy in the air condensed instantly, forming a faint ochre barrier around him. Crack! The basilisk's bite slammed into empty air, diverted by the barrier, its teeth snapping together hard enough to make Xia Nan's own jaw ache just hearing it. The ring's ability was pure defense. In a balanced fight, the deadline ring's once-per-day deflection point could be a crucial trump card, turning the tide at a critical moment. But facing such a ridiculous gap in power, all it could really do was let Xia Nan take a few more desperate steps. A heartbeat later, the basilisk's tank-like body plowed straight into him. In that instant, Xia Nan felt like he was back on the night before he transmigrated. A brutal force slammed into him. His toes left the ground, and his whole body was flung up like a doll in a child's hand. The stabbing pain in his back vanished from his senses, not because it wasn't there, but because it had blown straight past what a human body could endure. In its place came a hazy, drifting emptiness. Stars burst across his vision. His organs felt like they'd all been rearranged. The dense shrubs in front of him blurred and twisted into that blaring truck and the red-faced, drunken driver from his last life. PFF. His mouth opened and closed, and a mouthful of bright red blood sprayed out. The thick, metallic taste filled his nose and snapped him back to the present. Covered in grass and torn leaves, he spun through the air and hit the ground like a sack of rags. After a brief, numb pause, the pain came crashing back in like a tidal wave. He had no idea exactly how badly he was hurt, but there was no doubt. The dizziness, burning, stabbing, and numbness flooding him from head to toe had completely stolen any ability to fight back. Damn, 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 damn. The sheer hopelessness of it all made him swear silently in his heart. He thought of the healing potion in the small pouch at his waist, but his arm lay uselessly on the grass. Gray-white petrification was already creeping over his fingertips, spreading at a speed he could see with his own eyes. In the time it took to take one breath, it was already past his first knuckle. Boom! Heavy footsteps thudded in the brush just outside his field of vision. The massive shadow of the petrified lizard loomed over him. Am I going to die? For a moment, after the panic and rage, a strange calm settled in his chest. Images flashed in his mind. The rusty nail buried in Elky's skull, gag hanging upside down by his ankles in a bear goblin's hand, the snapped wooden bow in Magi's arms. He'd never truly sat down and thought about how his transmigrator journey might end, but after seeing what happened to the stinky fish and shrimp team, some part of him had already accepted that it could be ugly. Swoosh! The sharp whistle of something tearing through the air rang out from the treetops nearby. A cold gleam cut through the mist. The half-elf's signature white-fletched arrow spun like a drill, so fast it was almost invisible, streaking straight toward the petrified lizard. Ding! The aim was off. Whether by intention or not, the arrow didn't go for the eyes. Instead, it hit the beast's side, slamming into those thick gray-green, stone-like scales. Sparks flew. That rough, rock-hard armor blocked the arrow as easily as if it were straw, leaving only a faint white mark. But it did what it needed to do. The basilisk's attention shifted away from Xiaonan. Its thick, stone-plated neck slowly turned as it looked toward the direction the arrow had come from. Ghostly green light flickered in its eyes as an invisible wave of petrifying power washed out. And at that very moment, from somewhere just outside its field of view, a small brown clay pot came hurtling through the air. Bang! It smashed right into the bridge of the lizard's snout. Thick, black oil and powdery dust burst out together. They needed only a single spark to erupt like a small bomb. Roar! In less than a heartbeat, fire crawled over the petrified lizard's head. Its agonized roar shook the forest. Xiaonan had no intention of wasting the chance his teammates had bought with such risk. His body was wrecked from the impact, but the momentary calm that had come with facing death allowed his mind to snap back into focus. Almost the instant he heard the half-elf's arrow cut through the air, he forced his mangled arm to move. Gritting his teeth against the waves of pain, he reached with trembling fingers for the glowing healing potion at his waist. He bit the cork out and poured. He gulped down half the bottle in one breath. The liquid was cool, faintly sweet, with a refreshing scent. As it slid down his throat into his stomach, it turned into streams of warmth, surging along his blood vessels throughout his body. It felt like he'd suddenly been dropped into a hot spring. Within a few breaths, the all-consuming pain began to ease.
Hey everyone, Firescale Audiobooks here. If there's a novel you'd love to hear more of, you can support us on Patreon or Ko-fi. Depending on your tier, I'll make extra parts just for the stories you're most excited about. Usually I can only upload 4 to 5 parts of each novel, but with your support, we can go beyond that. And of course, don't forget to hit subscribe. It helps more than you know.
A grayish-blue figure engulfed in flames flashed by in his peripheral vision. At this moment, Xiaonan had no time to wait for the healing potion to further work its effects. Having just regained his mobility, he propped himself up with both hands and forced himself to crawl up from the ground. Then, without looking back, he continued to run deeper into the dense forest. The wooden arrows, burning bombs, and the 2 half-elves who disappeared after launching their attack made Xiaonan instinctively know that this was not a counterattack led by Haiyan and Wood. It was simply a delaying tactic to save him from the claws of the petrified lizard. He had to seize the opportunity to widen the distance as much as possible. And indeed, that was the case. The sudden fire and the intense burning pain at the tip of its sensitive nose made the petrified lizard instinctively thrash its head like a raging bull. And although its relatively weak facial scales were still tough and solid, they played a considerable role here. 10 seconds? Or 20 seconds? The flames that were fiercely burning were extinguished as the surrounding forest trees and underbrush snapped and crunched under their weight. Thick nostrils exhaled hot air. The 2 figures atop the treetops had long disappeared, leaving only a distant, stumbling shadow swiftly departing in his perception. As if mocked by a weak prey, the savage fury unique to beasts ignited in the heart of this brutal demon. Roar! It suddenly screeched toward the sky. Then, like a tank, it charged again in an unrestrained mad rush, chasing in the direction Xiaonan was fleeing. Bang! 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 The heavy, drum-like footsteps echoed once more in the dense forest behind. Xiaonan felt the ground vibrations and the violent noise of trees collapsing. He wanted to speed up, but his body had already reached its limit. His pace slowed, with the soft grass beneath feeling like a muddy swamp, making lifting his legs increasingly difficult. The half-bottle of healing potion allowed him to temporarily recover from serious injury and regain some mobility. But hoping to fully recover in such a short time was clearly not something this small potion could achieve. After all, its name didn't include prefixes like strong or superior. So he just kept running forward as best as he could. Even if the thin mist in the air was getting denser, reducing visibility rapidly, and the trees in his sight growing more concentrated. Clearly, he had moved away from the outer perimeter of Mist Forest. Besides, Xiaonan noticed something else. The direction he had hastily chosen in this crisis seemed to be exactly where he had hesitated before deciding to turn back, a place where things from the other world originated. The roadside buildings with varying styles, blending into the shrubs and branches, appeared increasingly frequently. Not only the once tall wooden taverns, but also the dilapidated temples with half-hanging copper bells, collapsed majestic palaces. As if he was gradually approaching the center of it all, his intensely focused attention seemed to quicken the flow of time as well. Who knows how long had passed, until the warm current from the healing potion gradually dissipated in the surging flow, leaving no trace behind. Only then, under the effect of his already exhausted stamina, Xiaonan gradually slowed his steps. Huff, huff, huff. He panted heavily, his consciousness and senses returning to his brain with the intake of air. Did I escape? He instinctively wondered in his heart. Even while he was fleeing just now, he could clearly feel the petrified lizard, driven by rage, chasing him even more fiercely than at the start. With the speed he sensed in his heart at the time, for a moment, he felt that everything he had done was futile. But when did the footsteps of the petrified lizard suddenly disappear? It wasn't because he had escaped its perception range, slowing its steps unintentionally to search for him, but rather a sudden halt, like an emergency brake, with the footsteps abruptly vanishing. Panting heavily, with post-intense exercise bewilderment on his face, Xiaonan looked around. The mist in the air thickened a lot, even weakening the sunlight above. He suddenly sensed something off. Where are those buildings? The ruins he had seen everywhere just now seemed to have vanished. Not even a piece of brick or tile in sight. Dim and quiet. Xiaonan suddenly felt an illusion. Eye of the storm. Instinctively, he turned his body, stepping lightly forward. Buzz. Without any warning, extremely abruptly. The space around Xiaonan suddenly twisted and blurred for a moment. The next second, his body vanished into the mist. Xiaonan? Xiaonan. From the deep, dark silence of the dense forest, a voice called out in a subdued tone. Haiyan crouched low, carefully threading his way between the trees. Beside him was his ever-present shadow-like guardwood. Unlike their first encounter's bright cleanliness, the two now appeared somewhat disheveled. Not only were their bodies covered in grass seeds and leaf fragments, but even their hair was matted with sweat. Silver-gray eyes emitted a faint glow in the darkness as Haiyan carefully searched for his companion. The dark vision from his elf bloodline allowed him to see clearly, as if in daylight, even in dim environments, capturing everything within 60 feet. No discovery. Would remain silent, but was equally executing his efforts, maintaining vigilance while meticulously searching for details in the surrounding woodland with his rich experience. One possessed ranger-related battle skills, with a bloodline akin to nature's favorite elf flowing through him. The other naturally excelled in concealment, existing as a wanderer, active in the shadows. Just avoiding the sight of the petrified lizard allowed them to escape its perception easily. Thus, they could seize the opportunity when the petrified lizard was inattentive, launching a surprise to rescue Xiaonan from its claws. They made a big detour, trailing the disturbance here all the way. Young Master here would seem to have discovered something, crouching to alert the nearby half-elf. They saw a series of footprints imprinted in the soft, moist meadow before them. As if pursued by something behind, and exhausted, the prints were short and dense, with some broken plant roots and stems nearby. Curiously, the footprint owner seemed to have vanished suddenly, causing the continuous footprints to abruptly end on some ground. Half-elf Haiyan suddenly looked up, eyes scanning and catching in the lush canopy. Young Master, we are already in the depths of Mist Forest, Wood showed hesitation, reminding from the side. Upon hearing, Haiyan's expression remained unchanged. He glanced at the vaguely dimming sky overhead and then looked down at the abruptly ended footprint, speaking slowly yet firmly. We'll search for another 2 hours. If there's still no discovery, we'll withdraw to the outskirts temporarily. Okay. Meanwhile, elsewhere. Boom. The coarsely textured gray-green scales crashed fiercely against the tree trunk. The thick brown bark, capable of withstanding blade and axe, was pierced through instantly, tearing the wood fibers, revealing its tender interior. The basilisk, the petrified lizard, was venting its pent-up rage on the innocent oak tree. Mud splattered. The massive root system deep in the soil was suddenly upheaved, including half of the fractured trunk under the demon's seemingly steel-crushing force. It roared, a ghostly green light flickering incessantly in its eyes. The scales on top of its skull and the surrounding brown crystalline bone spur showed faint scorch marks on their surface. The petrified lizard could sense the dispersing human scent far ahead in the dense forest, clearly knowing that such weak creatures were, by no means, its match. Having barely survived the petrification gaze invasion by chance, they could easily fall prey to a casual swipe or bite. Yet even so, the petrified lizard made no move to continue the hunt. It only lingered at the increasingly dense architecture's periphery, vainly and powerlessly wreaking havoc in the surrounding shrubs and bushes, as if there was an invisible boundary line between it and those architectural ruins, not daring to step even a foot across, until finally toppling dozens of towering trees to the ground, turning numerous disturbed creatures in the forest into cold stone statues. The petrified lizard hesitated, with human-like doubt and caution, glancing at the direction where Xiaonan disappeared. It turned around, dragging its cumbersome body, vanishing into the mist and depths of the dense forest. Xiaonan felt the air temperature around his body suddenly drop sharply. Suddenly, his vision went dark. The next second, the dense forest underbrush once filled with moist fog before him was replaced by a bare stone wall. Pain, dizziness. It was like missing a step on the stairs, the sudden panic causing his exhausted body to no longer hold out. He unconsciously let out a pained murmur and suddenly collapsed to the ground. With his last bit of strength, he barely managed to keep his eyes open and glance around. Seeing no immediate danger, he closed his eyes again amidst the tide of fatigue and pain. He didn't know how much time passed. Hiss! A cold, slick sensation came from his cheek, faintly feeling the muscle wriggling beneath hardened scales. Xiaonan slowly opened his eyes. Shit! He jumped up abruptly, throwing the reddish-brown long snake that had somehow crawled onto him to the ground. An iron-gray, cold gleam flashed through the dim air. The head of the snake was severed, its long body twisted and twitched. Using the blade tip to pick up the snake's head and toss it into the corner, he let out a slight sigh of relief. Leaning against the stone wall behind him, Xiaonan gripped the beheading long sword tightly. Only now, after a brief dizziness following his frantic escape, did he have a chance to carefully observe his current surroundings. This was a sealed cave. There was nothing remarkable about it. The bare, gray stone walls filled his sight everywhere. Occasionally, glowing strange fungal grass would creep across the rock surface, turning the cave, which should have been pitch dark, into its current dim state due to the eerie blue light. For some reason, even though there weren't any obvious features present, just staring at the deathly gray stone walls before him, Xiaonan felt a deep, intrinsic sense of illusion, of being out of place with the real world, as if a chunk of a mountain from another world had been cut out and forcibly inserted into this world, just like the carriages, wooden houses, and courtyards he saw along the way. Exactly the same. Moreover, clearly a moment ago, he was in Mist Forest, fiercely pursued by the petrified lizard, but in an instant, it was as if he had fallen into some trap and was teleported here. A pensive expression appeared on his face. He didn't act recklessly. After his consciousness gradually returned to his body, Xiaonan, confirming his current location was temporarily safe, the first thing he did was check his physical condition. His legs were the least injured. Only the sides of his calves were scratched by the thorns in the forest while escaping, an ordinary abrasion, which had now stopped bleeding. A stabbing pain came from the middle of his chest, to the left, more noticeable when breathing, but still bearable, perhaps a rib fracture. The most severe was his right forearm. Enduring the pain, he lifted the padding under the leather armor, discovering a large bruise, swollen and blue-purple, near the wrist of his right arm's ulna. While escaping, his attention was focused, and he barely felt it. Now, waves of soreness and numbing pain spread from it, even making flexing his fingers and gripping the sword handle extremely challenging. It must be noted that before this, to regain mobility, he had downed half a bottle of healing potion. One gulp, 25 gold. Feeling a bit of regret, but not remorse. If not for that life-saving potion, he might not have lasted until now, having already been petrified and devoured by the lizard. For a life in return, even 2,500 gold would be worth it. Sighing in his heart, Xian'an's hands didn't idle, somewhat laboriously retrieving the medical tool set he bought before departure from his backpack. Ordinary quality healing potion, in critical moments, can preserve life, cure most minor injuries, and alleviate pain. But for injuries like fractured bones, it doesn't provide immediate effects. The adventurer needs to deal with them himself. Rip, clumsily using the splint in the tool set to fix his forearm, he wrapped it tightly with bandages held in his left hand before biting the excess bandage off with his teeth. According to the treatment method recorded in the adventurer's manual, if the forearm is injured, a sling should be used to hang the arm and prevent worsening the injury. With limited conditions now, he could only manage this much. His fingers flexed slightly despite the sore swelling. The tips still had some gray-white petrification marks, but under the healing potion's effect, they'd eased greatly, regaining some sensation. In contemplation, Xian'an thought. He seemed to have seen petrification-type detoxification potion at the alchemy shop before, though he couldn't recall its price, but at least it gave him a hope for recovery. After this return trip, I should take a look. Speaking of which, during the battle with the rusted monster, Xian'an saved the half-elf's life, causing him to owe Xian'an a favor and agreed to help contact a battle skill master as repayment. And just now, during the chase, the half-elf also returned the favor by stalling the petrified lizard, giving Xian'an precious time to escape. In this back and forth, Xian'an unexpectedly owes him again. So if Haiyan needs help in the future and Xian'an can be of assistance, he doesn't mind lending a hand. Of course, the premise is that he needs to get out of this damn place first. Xian'an shook his head, casting away thoughts irrelevant to the current situation. After treating his wounds, it was time to check the condition of his equipment. Beheading longsword, barely unsheathed during the escape, remained intact. Deadline, ring, deflection field has entered its 24-hour cooldown, temporarily leaving one less trump card. Healing potion, half a bottle remains. Leather armor, ruined. With a pained expression, Xian'an touched the custom-made leather armor he had bought at Barnes' store, spending a substantial 10 gold. Although from the front it seemed all right, only stained with a bit of blood and grass. But under the impact of the petrified lizard, the back had been completely shattered, full of dents and cracks, clearly unusable. When I return to the city, this will be another hefty expense. Sigh. With a sigh, Xian'an put the tattered leather armor back on. He stood up, gazing into the depths of the cave. Now that he was teleported here, though he escaped the petrified lizard's pursuit, it didn't mean he was safe. Without the support of his teammates, he could only rely on himself. His chest rose and fell, his breathing gradually becoming steady and firm. With his body slightly pressed to the wall, holding a gray long sword, he cautiously advanced step by step towards the cave's only path. Creak! Thick leather shoes stomped down, crushing 2 thumb-sized black scorpions beneath them. A pale skull, devoid of any flesh, picked up by a hand stained with dirt and blood from the ground. The place Xian'an was now located was a long, deep passageway. How it was excavated was unknown. The stone walls on both sides were rough and uneven, devoid of any man-made traces. But compared to the previously open cave, the tunnel now contained many more pale bones on both sides. Approaching the wall, relying on the faint blue light emitted by the fungus on it, he carefully identified the skull in his hand. Before coming here, Xian'an, who had no medical training, could never have so casually held a human skull to examine like this. But now, having experienced so many life-and-death crises, simple bones could no longer stir his emotions. Human, another human, he thought to himself. All the bones Xian'an Nen had been able to examine and identify along the way came from humans. In other worlds, this might not be such a surprising finding. But now he was in a fantasy world filled with dwarves, elves, and other unique races. Not to mention numerous mixed-race individuals. If there really was a place filled with the corpses of intelligent beings, unless it was a massacre targeting a specific race, it couldn't just be humans appearing as a sole species. Combining the cave's surreal and unique atmosphere with the countless peculiar structures encountered on the way, Xianen had a vague guess. Perhaps he had been teleported to an area also from the other world? Placing the skull back, he continued forward with caution, guided by the faint light. And then he found a dead end. A cold, dark wall stood directly in front, blocking all paths. Xianen appeared calm and composed, yet a slight fluctuation was visible in his dark eyes. This was the only path in the entire cave. If the passage couldn't lead outside, it meant that after narrowly escaping the pursuit, he would truly die here. Phew! Xianen took a deep breath, trying not to indulge in countless negative thoughts. He stepped forward, hands probing the wall, attempting to find a potential door mechanism. The wall was completely black, not made of stone, felt colder than stone walls, as if it was metal, with a smooth surface covered in countless intricate patterns, arranged in sheets, scraping upwards even felt a bit sharp. Finally, as he crouched halfway, groping at the lower right corner of the black wall, a trace of extremely faint phosphorescence caught his attention. It was the peculiar blue glow unique to cave-dwelling fungi, but its source was a crevice in the rock at the corner of the black wall. Could it be? A flash of delight crossed Xianan's eyes. He suddenly bent down, using his palm to move the loose rocks aside. When encountering smaller gaps, he even pulled out the dagger from his waist, using all his strength to pry the stones up. After about 20 minutes, a small hole, about half a person's height, appeared in the corner of the black wall before Xianan's eyes. The faint blue light became even more bright. Alone, without regard for his posture, he used both hands and feet, following the light, and crawled in. Unexpectedly, the small hole was not deep. After only a few steps, the originally narrow passage suddenly opened up. A vast space large enough to generate echoes appeared before his eyes. Fungal colonies densely covered the surrounding stone walls, illuminating the entire space brightly. As Xianen crawled out from the small hole, he instinctively turned around, looking at the black wall that horizontally blocked the tunnel. Buzz! Time seemed to freeze at this moment. Sweat dripped from his forehead, leaving a small water stain on the cold ground. Xianen still maintained the action of turning back, but he was suddenly frozen in place. Motionless. His gaze was glued to the direction he had come from. The black wall? No, that was not a man-made wall. The cool touch like metal, fine flaky texture. It was a massive snake body, as thick as a train, enough to fill the entire tunnel. Words fail to describe Xianan's experience at this moment. Like waking up in the middle of the night, suddenly seeing a section of a snake's body on your bed through the moonlight. Your first reaction might be to jump up and panic, but at the same time, your eyes would subconsciously follow the snake's body, looking for its head to determine if it had slipped into your bed duvet or merely circled around the bedside. In shock, Xianan's gaze instinctively followed the enormous snake body upwards. Ground wall. Above. Holy crap. He felt a chill surge from his tailbone to his crown, goosebumps rising all over his body. A terrifying snake head capable of swallowing an entire elephant was directly above him, staring unblinkingly with its cold, vicious vertical pupils. The immense oppressive feeling from the enormous difference in size caused him to give up resisting almost immediately, subconsciously closing his eyes. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. Xianen stood rigidly in place, the stabbing pain in his chest and abdomen with each breath reminding him that he was still alive. He slowly opened his eyes. Still the massive, awe-inspiring giant snake, but also motionless. Gulp. His Adam's apple moved as he swallowed hard. Xianen vaguely sensed something amiss, his gaze continuing to trace the long snake body upward. Sure enough, at the very top of the cavern dome, a brown rock cone from who knows where pinned the giant snake like a thumbtack to the stone ceiling above it, right at its critical 7-inch spot. The deceptively cold and fierce eyes of the giant snake had long since lost their luster. The train-sized body, like the countless white bones outside the cave, had become nothing more than a lifeless corpse with no hope of revival. He let out a slight sigh of relief. Only under such circumstances could Xianen have the chance, and be in a state of being alive, to carefully observe the giant snake's appearance. Its entire body was pitch black, covered in hard, metallic, ink-colored scales, its massive, elongated body winding and climbing within the cave, making it impossible to judge its exact length. The face scales were snow white, devoid of any impurities, making its emerald green eyes more pronounced, akin to green jade and jadeite, with deep, unlit pupils. And in the middle of its head, suspended high in midair, were several pure golden scales flashing as if adorned like a crown ornament on the back of the head. For some reason, staring at the terrifying giant snake before him. All of a sudden, Xianan's mind flashed with the image of cutting off goblin ears or extracting rusted monster poison glands. A daring yet extremely reasonable idea gradually brewed in his mind. As an adventurer, bringing back some trophies should be quite normal, right? The crisp sound of metal clashing, accompanied by fleeting sparks in the chilly air, echoed intermittently in the spacious area of the cave. Vortex slash. The iron-gray curved sword light, howling as it instantly landed on the scales resembling black iron. Pain, pain, pain. Xianen only felt a paralyzing recoil force coming from the sword hilt, causing half of his body to momentarily lose sensation. And what followed immediately was the intense pain beneath the splint and bandage on his right hand. Sitting on the ground for a while, with his clothes soaked in sweat at the back, he finally managed to recover. He tiredly leaned against the stone wall, looking at the massive snake body before him, as thick as a train. He glanced up again at the snake head, with its emerald green icy eyes glaring coldly at him. He couldn't help but sigh. Really, was I too naive? Driven by the whimsical thoughts in his mind, Xianen had grandly executed his plan to collect the spoils of war. Although he wasn't sure of the specific type of this black snake, both the scale armor and the gallbladder, if brought back to the town, would likely bring him considerable profit. However, this snake, so massive it defied common human imagination, seemed to possess defense capabilities as powerful as the most advanced armored vehicles. Chopping, dicing, prying, drilling. Over the past several minutes, Xianen used all his strength and attempted countless methods. In the end, even with his injuries, he used the vortex slash, yet made no progress. He even suspected that those cool and delicate black scales could easily withstand bullets and explosives from the technological world. Under such circumstances, the dagger and longsword in Xianan's hand were as primitive and powerless against the snake's body as human weapons in sci-fi novels confronting the Trisolaran droplets. He also tried climbing the snake's body to reach the section on the cave roof where the snake was pinned by stone spikes. The scales there must be breached, and he might gather a few fragments or even a few drops of blood. The result was still a failure. The scales appeared rugged and distinctively shaped, but the gaps between them were actually extremely tight, making it difficult to find leverage during climbing. The scale edges were sharp, and a slight force would cause a continuous bleeding cut on his hand. Moreover, with the massive snake itself suspended at the cave's top, even if he really climbed up, a slip could result in instant death, undeviated by any healing potion. Leaning on the stone wall with his still functional left arm, Xianen slowly stood up, placing the beheading longsword back into its sheath. Aware of the myriad methods of collecting spoils from demons listed in the adventurer's manual, he knew well how many precious treasures such a large snake demon held within its body. "I'm not satisfied." His expression was a bit complicated as he forcefully shifted his gaze away. No point in being stubborn. However much energy and thought he spent, What's not achievable remains unachievable. I'll come back later if I get the chance. Now, the foremost task is to find the exit from this eerie place. Xianan exhaled slowly, calming his emotions while regaining his spirits. He carefully surveyed the spacious cave he was currently in. Unlike the previous deep, long passages, the luminescent fungal colonies on the stone walls around the cave were particularly active, their bluish glow filling every corner of the space. Allowing Xianan to observe closely and clearly the details hidden in the darkness. There are numerous scratches and impact marks on both sides of the stone walls, presumably left by this giant snake during its lifetime. Judging by this snake's size, the passage I came through earlier is inadequate. Is there another exit, or some other reason? The scattered human remains seen earlier are now strangely absent. Xianan suddenly halted his gaze. He looked towards a corner deep within the cave. A dab of pale white appeared in his sight. Approaching closely, it turned out to be human skeletal remains leaning against the wall. Different from the fragmented bones encountered earlier, this skeleton, though reduced to bare bones, was relatively intact. Calf, pelvic bone, ribs, skull. Even a few pieces of navy blue ragged cloth clung to it, faintly revealing the previous robe style. Amidst this, the most striking element was the pitch-black scale piercing through the spine, embedded in the stone wall, right in the middle of the chest cavity. What's this? Xianan's eyes lit up, filled with a sudden sense of surprise, like seeing light at the end of a tunnel. Sorry to disturb, he said softly to the remains ahead, then directly walked forward. With both hands, he pulled the scale out of the stone wall. Cradling it in his palm, he closely examined it. The scale was rhombus-shaped, about the length of a forearm, its surface dark with a glossy sheen, cold and smooth to touch, yet resiliently hard. Undoubtedly, the rhombus-shaped scale in Xianan's hand was just the steel rock snake scale that he had futilely exerted all his energy to obtain earlier. Recalling now, the formidable defensive power, unbeaten even by his vortex / using the beheading longsword, which left no scratch on it. An emotional ripple stirred in Xianan's heart. Once back, perhaps he could ask the blacksmith in River Valley Town to craft equipment using this scale as the primary material. It should be Rockhammer. I think they do have custom services at their shop. To fully exploit its defensive properties, crafting it into armor or shield would be best, though its size might be insufficient, and if a shield were made, he might need to learn related usage techniques. Considering its sharp edges, could it also be an option for small weapons? I'll deal with that when I get back. Xianan shook his head, carefully tucking the scale deep into his backpack, suddenly finding his cautious demeanor amusing. If something really happened with the demonstrated defensive strength of this scale, even if his ashes were scattered, the scale would probably remain unscathed. The unexpected discovery lifted his spirits slightly. Intending to leave just like that, he suddenly noticed, besides the remains, near lies an old wooden sword covered in dust, its surface bearing the traces of time. For safety's sake, Xianan held his breath and focused intently on the wooden sword. Then, unexpectedly, a string of translucent information floated before his eyes. Type, wooden sword. Level, rare blue. Effect, plus 15% damage to undead creatures, Yang Flame. Plus 20% damage to snake and scorpion-type creatures, Yang Flame. Description, a specially crafted wooden sword from an ancient sect formed under harsh conditions with rare materials, granting it significant power against certain types of creatures. Note, since my entry as a beginner, I've been taught by my master and assisted by fellow disciples, which I deeply appreciate. Now, having heard of the snake and scorpion scourge devastating my hometown, leaving people homeless, though I am weak and lacking in talent, I cannot forget the past kindness that nurtured me. Thus, I humbly request the Master's permission to descend the mountain to eliminate the demons and bring peace to the people. Intersect disciple of Bamboo Spring Temple, Li Haoran. Xianan's gaze paused, feeling a sense of astonishment. This, indeed, is a product from another world. Up until now, the distinctive styles of the buildings encountered along the journey, including the cave Xiaonan currently found himself in, and the enormous black snake within the cavern, all made sense. Although it was unclear what exactly transpired, there was no doubt that these entities originated from another world, entirely different from the fantastical world he was in now. And, somehow, they had been incorporated into this space in a fragmented form. Xiaonan felt a sense of relief. The attribute panel golden finger he brought with him after crossing over seemed only to display information about equipment and tools, far less useful than the systems with upgrade and point allocation functionalities he had imagined. Yet in the real world, it provided him with enormous assistance in various aspects. Whether it was the beheading longsword discarded in the corner of the blacksmith shop, or the truth revealed through the panel information. Without the bonus from this golden finger, while it wouldn't be impossible to make progress, he wouldn't be as unhurried as he was now. Not to mention this blue rare equipment, appearing ordinary like just a regular wooden sword in his hand. Xiaonan took out the remaining gauze from his backpack and carefully wiped the dust off the sword blade. The wooden sword's form, originally concealed under sand and soil, gradually revealed itself before him. About 3 feet in length, a one-handed sword, shorter than the beheading longsword, made entirely of the black-brown ebony, with a texture that is smooth and soft. The hilt and guard are integrated with the blade in a simple short round design, free from unnecessary decoration. In appearance alone, apart from its color and some distinctive stylistic details, it seemed no different from the wooden swords used in daily training. Only Xiaonan knew that this seemingly ordinary one-handed sword was, in this world, genuinely an enchanted weapon. He examined the blade closely, noting that after wiping, its surface showed hardly any marks, appearing as if brand new. Then he rummaged through his backpack and found the hemp rope he had bought before setting out, tying it with the beheading long sword to his back. Glancing at the pale skeleton leaning against the stone wall, Xiaonan paused, sighing silently. Although there were no other items around the corpse to prove its identity, the information from the panel allowed him to roughly confirm that this was the one who left the name Li Haoran in the note. Combining this with the large snake corpse in the cave, and the sudden influx of snakes and insects in the mist forest, and the mention of a snake and scorpion scourge in the note, he could roughly deduce the correlation among them. However, the remains of this righteous man had now traveled to the other world, along with the place of his burial. No one here knew him, and besides himself, probably no one would learn of his story. If he had not agreed to join the half-elves team, hadn't followed the team deep into the mist forest, perhaps he would still be lying quietly in this stone cave, accompanied by the giant snake corpse that had taken his life. Even if some unfortunate adventurer inadvertently stumbled in, they would likely be only astonished by the snake's size, dismissing the skeletal remains and the seemingly ordinary wooden sword as trivial. Thoughts flowed through his mind. Finding a way out wasn't something that could be accomplished immediately, and there wasn't any urgent danger to confront at the moment. Xiaonan hesitated, then leaned down, righted the skeleton he had knocked over by pulling out a scale, laying it flat on the ground. Surrounded on all sides by rock, the cave walls were difficult to dig through. He gathered stones, piling them atop the skeleton until it was completely buried. He even pulled out the dagger at his waist, found a slightly longer stone, carved the name upon it, and planted it in the center of the stone mound. With limited resources, this was all he could do. Xiaonan wasn't sure about the customs of the other person's world, but considering it was similar to the ancient civilization of his previous country, there should be a concept of resting in peace. At least he had done his part sincerely. After wiping the sweat from his forehead, he took one last look at the stone mound in the cave's corner. Then he withdrew his gaze. Now, it was time to find a way out. Just as he was about to trace along the edge of the cave, carefully feeling his way around, the wooden sword he had just fastened to his back unexpectedly radiated a sense of heat. Surprised, he reached for the hilt and unsheathed the sword. Suddenly, as if guided, the sword's tip pointed precisely to the spot where the skeleton had been leaning against. The stone wall suddenly blurred for a moment. Instinctively, Xian held the wooden sword with his left hand and lightly tapped the surface. Buzz! In an instant, the cold, ashen wall vanished. In its place, a small but exquisite stone room appeared. The faint blue luminescent fungi that had grown between the rocks seemed to gather consciously at the top of the stone room. The concentrated beam of light shone down like a spotlight from above. At the center of the light was a conical stone projection, with a vine trailing over it. At the end of the vine hung a small and delicate gourd. The gourd's surface was golden as jade, crystal clear, shimmering under the light. But all these things before him were no longer important to Xianen now. Upon a moment the stone room unveiled itself. All his focus and attention were drawn to the gourd's opening, to the scintillating golden dewdrop, suspended yet about to fall. It seemed to be the origin of all surrounding illusions, the very core of these otherworld artifacts. Ding! A sound akin to jade striking resounded in his ears, and the droplet quivered as if about to fall the next moment. Instinctively, Xianen stepped forward, cupping his hands to catch it. The dewdrops seeped into his skin. Boom! Numerous illusory shadows twisted before his eyes, the stone walls, vines, phosphorescence receding like a tide. That familiar dizziness set in again. The next moment, Xianen was once again standing amidst the shrubs and dense forest of the Mist Forest. In his vision, the semi-transparent characters of the attribute panel flashed by like a flood. The dark green thorns curled and twitched under the searing flames, as if possessing a life of their own, with singed black scars rapidly spreading across their surface. Wood yanked the dagger, lodged deeply in the enemy's chest, free with a cold, weary expression. Before him were several humanoid thorn demons gradually consumed by the flames. It seemed to possess some sort of corrosive nature specifically against plants, turning the nearby area of grass into a peculiar dark green. Rustle! The towering oak branches behind swayed as the half-elf, holding a longbow, lightly descended. Both had just gone through a fierce, unexpected battle. The enemies were 5 dead needle monsters disguised as shrubs. Honestly, these demons weren't that strong in combat ability, even weaker than the rusted monsters they had encountered a few days earlier. However, in the Mist Forest, filled with thorns and tall grass everywhere, they were particularly troublesome with their slight ability to manipulate plants. In the end, it was Wood who used up the last few flame bombs to barely conclude the fight. And this was just one of the most common types of demons after leaving the outskirts of Mist Forest. "Young master, we should leave," Wood spoke, chest heaving noticeably, breathing heavily. Even for a wanderer who had already reached a professional level, staying long in the depths of Mist Forest was no easy feat, especially when he also had to protect the half-elf. Hyen was very aware of this. Searching blindly like headless chickens in such a dangerous area for a companion that had vanished would only drag both of them into danger. They had to give up. A struggle flashed across his face. Then he nodded towards Wood and said, "Then let's retreat to the outskirts first, then—" Squeak bang. Before he could finish, a noise suddenly erupted nearby, sending birds and beasts in the forest flying in alarm. And there, seemingly, was the last known location of Xianan's trail. The two exchanged a knowing glance, then immediately set off, running towards the direction of the sound. As the crystalline dewdrop merged into Xianan's body, he felt a cool, gentle stream spread throughout from his palms. It was as if he was floating amidst clouds and mist, feeling light enough to lift off his toes. The muscles that were near overexerted from high-intensity movement recovered under the stream's nourishment, silently becoming firmer and more resilient. It was as though even his heart was beating more vigorously, with the hot blood pumping through his veins driven by the stream, a more exuberant vitality. The petrification remnant on his fingertips crumbled into a few gray specks that drifted off in the wind, revealing intact fingertips beneath. The bone in his right forearm was corrected and restored by an unseen force within. There was no longer a stabbing pain near his ribs, and even the small wound on his calf that had stopped bleeding and started scabbing seemed to be erased by a rubber, leaving only smooth skin. Meanwhile, a string of translucent characters flashed in front of Xianan's eyes. Constitution +3. Specialty Copper Bones unlocked. Copper Bones. Category Specialty. Effect 10% reduction in physical damage. 0.5% probability to be immune to received physical damage. Description: you, who have absorbed the essence of otherworldly plants, have become more resilient and have gained some benefits of the rules. Notes: Grandfather. Xianan stood amidst the forest, looking at his right arm that had fully recovered, with a contemplative expression on his face. In his current state, it was like he had worked late into the night and then slept for 12 hours straight. His entire body felt incredibly relaxed, with past fatigue and pain completely swept away, replaced by abundant vigor and immense energy. It was almost the peak physical condition since he had crossed over to this world. So what on earth was that? He pondered, recalling the dewdrop that had just merged into his body with curiosity in his heart. Although it was the same otherworldly style, unlike other things, the dewdrop gave him an inexplicable sense of reality, as if it was the very origin that brought numerous buildings around into this world. And seemingly to confirm his suspicion, after he absorbed the golden dewdrop, the cave where he was initially located disappeared like an illusion. In front of him was only the familiar trees and grass of Mist Forest. Instinctively, he reached back to touch his wooden sword, feeling the hard texture upon his fingertips. Though still perplexed, the outcome was satisfactory. The dewdrop not only healed his injuries, but also provided an astonishing 3 constitution attribute points and granted him a defense specialization called Copper Bones, which seemed quite powerful on the attribute panel. He even managed to find a piece of rare quality blue equipment from the cave. The gains were considerable. Now, the only thing he needed to consider was how to safely escape from the depths of the Mist Forest and return to River Valley Town. I wonder how things are on Hyan's side. With wood there shouldn't be any problems. Xianan pondered, his eyes scanning the surroundings, trying to discern the direction. Suddenly, the dense bushes beside him rustled with a swaying sound. He instantly drew his beheading longsword, becoming alert. But then, upon seeing that it was the half-elf in wood, he relaxed. "How are you guys holding up? Are you okay?" Xianan asked, sheathing his sword as he looked at the two whose bodies were covered in grass clippings, with faint signs of battle on them. "We're fine. For some reason, that petrified lizard didn't chase us." Hyan, with a hint of confusion, looked at Xianan with his silver-gray eyes, concern evident. "But you." Compared to the two who looked quite battered after just finishing a fight, Xianan didn't look much better. His leather armor was cracked at the back, his pants had several slashes, mud spattered all over him, and even his hair was dusty. Blood-stained bandages and splints lay scattered around him. It wouldn't be hard to believe if one claimed he had just returned from a battlefield as a severely injured soldier. Yet, Xianan didn't appear weak or wounded at all. His black eyes were full of vigor, clearly energized. Thus, with just one glance, the half-elf noticed the contrast. After all, he had witnessed Xianan being hit by the petrified lizard head-on, relying on a healing potion just to gather the strength to escape. The words caught him a bit hesitant. "Oh." Noticing the other's gaze, Xianan's expression paused for a moment, realizing the half-elf's discovery. The incident was sudden. Having just escaped the cave, he hadn't had time to cover up the changes in his body nor think of a reasonable explanation. Though beside Hyan didn't speak, his glance, which swept over the wooden sword behind Xianan and the unmarred skin beneath his damaged clothing, showed he'd noticed some clues as well. After pondering for a moment, he organized his thoughts slightly in his mind. Xianan left out parts of details like the dewdrop or giant snake that might cause trouble for the group, and half-truthfully, he shared his encounter with the two before him. Unexpectedly, after hearing his explanation, both the half-elf and Wood didn't show the surprised expressions he had imagined. They even displayed commendable adventurer etiquette by not prying into the wooden sword he brought out. What you entered might be a secret realm. Wood rubbed his chin and spoke slowly. Secret realm. Xiaonan expressed his confusion about this unfamiliar term. Yes. Wood nodded, explaining. You are a native of the Sevilla Kingdom, right? Yes. Then you should have heard of the double-feathered harp story. Double-feathered harp. Xianan's brow furrowed as he sifted through the memories left by his former self. He finally recalled the story, which he had heard countless times from the elder at the village entrance during his childhood. The minstrel who is said to have traveled the entire world, even venturing to other realms? That's correct. The wanderer nodded gently. But what does this have to do with the so-called secret realm? The relation. What if I told you that the Abyss Hell and Star Realm Heaven mentioned in the double-feathered harp stories actually exist? Wood suddenly lifted his head, looking at Xia Nan before him. The material realm we inhabit is merely like a layering space. Various realms of different sizes and scales surround it. Many spaces interlace and merge, and the barriers between realms aren't stable. With this premise, as long as certain specific conditions are met, the space can undergo phenomena similar to folding and contracting. The wanderer's gaze swept over the mist floating around them. For example, a region with extremely dense magic power. Digesting the information from Wood's words, Xia then followed his line of thought and spoke. Yes. Wood glanced again at the wooden sword behind Xianan. These naturally formed secret realms, due to their unique nature, often house powerful demons and may also contain some kind of precious treasure. On this continent, the number of such spaces is not small. Therefore, even though they're not easy to find and are mostly born in the wilderness where demons are concentrated, every year there are rumors of a lucky adventurer accidentally discovering a secret realm somewhere. Some powerful spellcasters even create their own secret realm spaces using their abilities to distort time and space. Small ones might be the size of a warehouse, while larger ones, at this point, Wood glanced upwards at the sky covered by the treetop and lowered his voice. You should know that to some extent, the divine country can also be considered a type of secret realm. The conversation ended there, and the group fell into silence. Xianan carefully compared the features of the secret realm space, described by Wood with the cave he entered. He couldn't help but furrow his brows. It feels somewhat different, he mused silently to himself. Unexpectedly, Wood, who had just been explaining the world's outlook to Xianan, now showed a look of puzzlement and confusion. That can't be right. Wood suddenly took 2 steps forward to where Xianan was standing. He bent down to inspect Xianan's footprints closely and stomped the ground hard. If it really was a secret realm, then why couldn't both of us get in just now? If it had already closed before we came, you wouldn't have been able to come out either. Moreover, when it comes down to it, a secret realm is just a folded space and usually doesn't have the ability to affect the surrounding terrain. The various buildings we saw along the way don't seem like something a secret realm could bring about. Wood stood there, becoming more and more confused as he spoke. Xianan almost felt as though he could see a faint puff of smoke rising from Wood's head. And as the Wanderer had mentioned, Xianan himself also had a subtle sense that the now vanished cave, although having some similarities with this world's secret realms on certain levels, was fundamentally a completely different entity. At this moment, the half-elf, who had remained silent since earlier, suddenly asked, "Xianan, I hope this won't offend you, because among adventurers, this should be a kind of taboo," but his words revealed hesitation. Yet there was a hopeful look on his face, speckled with bits of grass. Was there anything in the cave that had an elven style? Hearing this, Xianan couldn't help but be taken aback. He then began meticulously and comprehensively recalling everything he had seen from the moment he entered the cave until he was transported out. Finally, he slowly shook his head and solemnly replied, "No." The half-elf wasn't too disappointed. He had already prepared himself mentally. He merely clapped his hand onto the guard beside him and said, "Now we really should go, Wood. This place truly isn't safe." In contrast to the troubles and dangers of their journey there, the return trip for the three was remarkably calm. Not only did they not encounter any dangerous demons, but even the pesky snakes and scorpions seemed to have lessened, no longer clustered densely in one area. Xianan suspected it was the influence of his absorption of dewdrop, causing the cave space to disappear. Compared to the trip there, which required frequent stops for rests, finding targets, or engaging in battles over an entire 2-day journey. On their way back, they arrived at the outskirts of the mist forest within just 1 day. Looking at the distant twinkling lights of River Valley Town on the horizon and the few lit-up houses nearby, the half-elf noticeably breathed a sigh of relief, paused, turned to Xianan beside him, and said goodbye. "Thanks to you this time, otherwise we probably wouldn't have made it this far. We're not going back to River Valley Town for now. Wood and I have a carriage stored at the inn. If there's a chance in the future, you're welcome to visit Nim." As for Larry and Doris, Hein's expression suddenly paused, his face hidden in the shadows of the night. Concealing his specific expression, "I will personally explain things to their parents when I return to Nim." Xianan had thought that the two would rest a few days with him in River Valley Town before returning, so this sudden farewell took him by surprise. But since they had said so, he didn't insist on asking them to stay. He tentatively suggested, "If you need anything, just write to me. I might be able to help." The two had saved him once when he faced the petrified lizard, and during this journey, he vaguely detected that something distressing might have happened to the half-elf's family. Within his ability, Xianan had no qualms offering assistance. However, Hein gently refused with a light smile and took out a dark card from his pocket. This crystal card contains 70 gold, along with the 30 gold before, as your reward for this mission. Also, when I get back to the city, I will start looking for a suitable battle skill master for you, but it may take a little while. I will contact you by writing. As the night filled the air, the half-elf blinked his signature silver-gray eyes, smiled and waved at Xianan, while the guard beside him nodded gently. "May the stars light up your path, and the forest will bless you. Farewell, my friend." Apart from some large cities with sufficient armament and solid defenses, bustle and prosperity are difficult to associate with human settlements under the night sky. After all, no one can assure you that the ravenous night demons wandering outside won't be attracted by the lights in your home. Of course, for River Valley Town, especially the street where the Adventure Association is located, that's another kind of scenery. Wow. Ha ha ha. Another drink. Another drink. Where's my rat meat platter? Why isn't it served yet? The warm, bright lights seem to become faint beneath the haze of alcohol and food aromas in the air. The crystal-clear liquor splashing out from cups, the reddish-orange flames swirling in the fireplace, and even the sweaty, inexperienced server weaving among the drinkers. The White Sparrow Tavern at night is almost another world. Bang! A wooden chair flipped over, and a bearded barbarian with his upper body bare, showcasing robust muscles, suddenly jumped onto a table. Ignoring the food sticking to his leather boots, he clutched a wooden cup and awkwardly swayed his scarred body to dance a traditional tribal dance to the cheers of those around him. Beside him was an equally enthusiastic minstrel, leaning back in his chair with crossed legs, playing his twist-stringed instrument quite suavely to accompany him. At the next table, a dwarf with auburn-braided whiskers clenched his teeth, arm muscles solid as steel bulging, as he arm-wrestled with a stout human opposite him. The onlookers behind them occasionally made a ruckus, causing the faces of the two at the table to flush red, fearing they would lose face in front of these boisterous drinkers. The tavern's main hall behind the bar. Chapton diligently polished the glass in his hand. His fingers pressed the soft cloth from the bottom up along the body of the glass, carefully scraping off stains and fingerprints. Then he ventured into the interior, using wrist strength to clean every corner within. Despite the noise outside the bar, he didn't lift his head, focused and earnest, as if caressing a lover's hand. Only occasionally did the barbarian's leather boots stomp the table heavily with dance steps, or when the dwarf won the arm wrestling, his large palm landed excitedly on the table. Only then did his bushy mustache quiver slightly, barely noticeable. The scene before him played out almost every evening since the White Sparrow Tavern was established. As the tavern's owner, Chapton was well aware and had long gotten used to it. Running a tavern, though seemingly simple, is not easy, and while difficult, it isn't overly complex. First, you need to research the local competition's business conditions and the identity and spending power of the main clientele before selecting a good plot of land. In this regard, Chapton felt he did well. The White Sparrow Tavern's excellent location, adjacent to the Adventurer Association, and the array of drinks and food from expensive status symbols to affordable value from money options, allowing both professionals, whose single piece of equipment could cover their annual income, and low-level adventurers living day-to-day hunting goblins to spend a relatively pleasant evening in the tavern. Second, you must get along well with those closely connected to the tavern, ranging from town law enforcement officers and advanced adventurers to cleaners responsible for waste disposal. Gold coin paves the way, benefiting you in all aspects. Otherwise, who knows when you might find a toxic demon carcass suddenly appearing in your kitchen, or a drunken and disruptive adventurer tearing your tavern apart. Finally, most importantly, and what Chapton wished young people aspiring to this line of work would know, don't kill the mood when adventurers, desperately needing alcohol and social interaction to unwind after a day of dangerous and grueling tasks, are blowing off steam. Otherwise, consecutive years of financial loss and the huge expenses on healing potions will tell you why. Of course, when certain adventurers become overly exuberant and unruly, his annual 3-digit management fee isn't paid for nothing. Someone else will handle it for him, gently placing the clean glass back into the wooden cabinet. Ignoring the increasingly loud noise in the main hall, Chapton took out a new cloth and polished the bar counter, pondering in his mind. MS. Edwina at the Green Grass Cauldron seems to have a new potion out lately. I should send a couple of molten lava size her way next time. Mr. Franson has a birthday next month. I've heard a professional has been invited for special training. A good one-handed sword should make an excellent birthday gift. Creak. The friction of the wooden door's hinges emitted a sluggish sound, accompanied by a chilling cold wind seeping through the door crack, bringing Chapton back to reality. He instinctively looked up. Caught in his sight was a tall, black-haired young man. His neat short hair, slightly messy from the evening breeze outside, with thin, clear lip lines, narrow yet elongated pitch-black eyes, reminiscent of the deep night outside the wooden door. His facial features carried a sharp, cold impression at first glance. Seemingly just returned from an adventure, visible cracks could be seen on the leather armor, and his clothes bore faint traces of blood. Carrying a long and a short weapon on his back, the longer one revealed an iron-gray blade beneath the sword's sheath, while the shorter one was tightly wrapped in bandages, obscuring its look. A dual swordsman? Chapton mused to himself, somewhat puzzled. It was evident from both the time and his attire that he had just finished a task. Yet the young man lacked the fatigue and difficulty Chapton associated with adventurers after enduring long journeys and numerous battles. On the contrary, he appeared energetic, in top form, as if he had been resting in town for several days. Did he rest during the day and then travel by night? That can't be right, with Miss Forrest being so dangerous. Who would dare travel at night? After a brief contemplation, finding it impossible to understand, Chapton decided not to dwell on it. After years of running the tavern, he's seen all sorts of strange people, and the countless stories from the drinkers have repeatedly told him, for those in the adventurer profession, don't prattle. However, knowing this doesn't mean everyone understands. The young man with black short hair attracted some attention. Just as he stepped into the tavern, approaching the bar, a tipsy figure clutching a drink staggered up to him. "Boy, are you new here?" He knew clearly that under the influence of alcohol, certain regions of the human brain would be affected, leading to some aggressive and irrational behaviors. Although he had just crossed over to this world not long ago, and his own strength wasn't particularly formidable, but in the face of potential offense from strangers, he was already prepared to respond, and subconsciously began assessing the battle strength of both sides. Severely drunk, so there's probably no chance of disguise. Unsteady on his feet, this could be utilized whether to retreat temporarily or to attack immediately. Against a humanoid opponent, the beheading longsword is more suitable, but the length of the blade might be inconvenient given our current proximity. I need to create some distance first, judging by the opponent's physique and attire. Meanwhile, Chapton watched the two people in front of him fall into an eerie silence. He gradually sensed something was off. That man, drunken and somewhat out of his mind, he knew him. Bernie, a famous drunkard in town. Clearly a proper adventurer who lived off mission bounties. Yet he spent almost every moment soaking in River Valley Town's taverns. Only when he was really out of money did he occasionally join his former team for a couple of missions to earn some drinking money before lingering back in town. His drinking behavior was terrible. In the less than half a year he's been in River Valley Town, his White Sparrow Tavern had already thrown out the drunk and disorderly Bernie 3 times. It was only because he was a somewhat decent person when sober that he hadn't put Bernie on a blacklist long before. As for the black-haired youth on the other side, Chapton suddenly noticed that the youth in front of him had slightly bent forward, clearly ready for combat, with his hand even slightly raised, seemingly prepared to grab the sword hilt at any moment. No need for that. No need for that. Behind him, 2 middle-aged men dressed as adventurers hurriedly stepped forward. They grabbed Bernie, who seemed on the verge of passing out due to his heavy drunken state, laughing awkwardly. "Sorry, he drank too much. We got caught up in the revelry and didn't keep an eye on him." Then they turned to Chapton behind the bar, patting their chests loudly and saying, "Put today's expenses for this friend here on my tab." They then apologized to Xia and dragged Bernie back to their seat. It wasn't because they saw through to Xianan's strength. These experienced low-level adventurers might backstab a close comrade over a valuable piece of equipment on a mission. But that's because there's sufficient profit on the scales. Surviving mission after mission, they certainly wouldn't ignore everything and only let emotions dictate their actions. A trivial matter that could easily be avoided with a wave of the hand, yet could unnecessarily create an unknown, strength-unknown enemy. Even a fool would know what to choose. They're all in the same line of work. Who knows where they might meet again in the future, or in what state they might be then. In such a situation, with 2 companions present, there's no way Bernie would conflict with Xianan. Of course, if you assume they were kind people just for that, you'd be sorely mistaken. After all, if huge benefits tempting enough to twist their moral compass were truly in front of them, they wouldn't hesitate to act just as fast. The imagined scene didn't happen, and the small episode in the tavern ended just like that. Although Xiaonan felt surprised, he didn't have any extra thoughts. With someone voluntarily offering to pay, he naturally went along. "I'll have the number 3 set meal," he said to the tavern owner in front of him. Having eaten dry rations in the forest for so many days was tough to handle. No lie, one night he even dreamt he returned to the previous world, eating to his heart's content at a restaurant he often visited. Now that he finally finished the mission, he naturally had to reward himself properly. Speaking of which, it was because of the unusual timing and most shops being closed that he had nowhere to handle his spoils. Otherwise, following the adventurer's manual, going through all the various shops would take him half a day at least. Sizzle. Heat rose, and the aroma of food entered his nostrils with each breath. It was still the combination of stewed meat, mushroom soup, and white bread. Dipping the bread in the mushroom soup, taking a bite. Tisk. The soft dough almost instantly melted in his mouth with a milky fragrance, intertwining with the sweet, fresh taste of the mushroom soup as he swallowed. Xiaonan squinted his eyes in pleasure. This is the life one should be living, he thought to himself. Meanwhile, the tavern owner Chapton placed a drink that looked a bit pricey on the table. "This one is on us at the White Sparrow." Facing Xiaonan's puzzled gaze, he said so. "Thank you." With no reason to refuse, Xiaonan nodded in gratitude. The glass landed on the table, with the crystal-clear liquid gently swirling. While eating dinner, his thoughts wandered, his eyes slightly unfocused. By the time he returned to River Valley Town, it was already dark, with no place to handle his spoils, so he planned to first rest a night at the White Sparrow. The bandages wrapped around the green pine, wooden sword on his back were a disguise he used out of concern that someone might notice something unusual. These days, keeping an eye out, once he had the chance to custom order a sword sheath at the blacksmith shop, it should be much more convenient. The drink settled in his stomach, leaving a spicy taste on his tongue. Yet his body had no reaction whatsoever. Xiaonan guessed it should be due to his current high constitution of 8 points taking effect. The previous 1 point of strength and 1 point of agility he gained from the full-level vortex / made him feel like he had changed bodies, his battle prowess skyrocketing. Now, having absorbed the dewdrop, which brought 3 points of constitution, the enhancement was significant to say the least. After traveling the entire day, even Wood, who had already gained a professional level, was left heaving and gasping by the end. Yet he felt at ease, not the slightest bit strained, as if he'd merely taken a stroll. Though part of that was due to the dewdrop replenishing his stamina, lost over the journey, it was enough to prove Xiaonan's current endurance mighty. On the other hand, although he didn't have a game interface to visually show an increased health bar, the enhancement in constitution also meant he could endure more damage in combat. Even though he hadn't tested it, he was confident that in the short term, he could repeatedly unleash the vortex / without impairing his body functions. The situation where his arms would go sore after executing several cuts no longer existed. Looking deeper, the enhancement in constitution naturally implied an increased ability to withstand strikes. If he were to now return to Mist Forest and have that petrified lizard hit him from behind again, Xiaonan suddenly shivered, the back of his heart seeming to ache faintly. Death wouldn't be the outcome, but let's not try it. At least you don't have to worry about being woken up halfway through by your companion on night watch, and then groggily fighting off a surprise attack from a demon with your hair a mess. Xianan had a long-awaited good night's sleep, but he didn't oversleep. The next morning, at dawn, he forcibly dragged himself out of bed through sheer willpower. As an adventurer, the first day after completing a task is often the busiest. Submitting tasks, sorting out loot, repairing equipment. Countless urgent tasks lay stacked in Xianan's mind like a checklist. Even if it takes him the whole day to deal with these matters, he does so willingly, because only by doing so, after a hard day's work, can he carry his bulging wallet and enjoy his hard-earned vacation without any burdens. A quick wash, then he left the tavern. Xianan, carrying a somewhat heavy backpack, arrived at the River Valley Town Adventurer Association. It was still that uniquely Mist Forest-styled treehouse building, and it was still busy as ever. Even though he had gotten up as early as possible, when he stepped onto the dark brown oak floor at the entrance of the association, his field of vision was already filled with adventurers of different shapes and sizes. Some, like him, carried bulging backpacks, looking like they had come early to submit a task. Others were gathered in 3s and 5s under the task board, occasionally leaning close to whisper amongst themselves. Xianan even saw an extremely burly half-orc, over 2 meters tall, leisurely swaying in from the street, carrying a hideously looking demon's head. His dust-covered body bore visible signs of battle, and the neck of the head in his hand was still dripping blood. He must have just finished an intense fight. The thick stench of blood mixed with the odor of days unbathed in the wild caused passing adventurers to wrinkle their noses and dodge away. But as Xianan observed, faced with the disdainful reactions of those around him, the half-orc showed no signs of anger. On the contrary, he wore an expression of complete satisfaction and enjoyment. That composed demeanor, much like a triumphant fisherman returning with a big catch, eager to take the long way home just to show off to the whole town. Xianan even suspected if someone approached now to ask the half-orc the names of the demons or details of the battle, whether his 2 protruding tusks would laugh their way into his stomach. Ultimately, the half-orc didn't enter the Adventurer Association. He was just at the entrance when the staff, alerted by the scene, politely asked him to clean up and come back again. Yet he still displayed a satisfied expression, clearly having achieved his goal. Drawing back his gaze, Xianan felt that his mood, oppressed by staying in the mist forest for so long, was relieved by this comical scene before him. Ding-ling. The crisp sound of the bell brought him back to reality, as he saw the adventurer who had been in front of him leave the counter with her money pouch. He composed himself and stepped up to the counter. It was still the same short-haired girl with a drowsy look, head lowered, as if she might fall asleep the next second. Task number, came the lethargic sound from her mouth. 387H, the Firefly Garlic Vine Collection Task. Silence. The girl didn't respond immediately, just manipulated something below the counter with her hands. Then she slowly spoke again. Number 387H, task overdue. The poster didn't choose to extend the bounty. It has been withdrawn. As expected, though Xianan was mentally prepared, he still felt a tinge of disappointment. Normally, 3 days would be more than enough time for him to make a round trip from River Valley Town to the outskirts of the Mist Forest. The task time was quite ample, but who could have anticipated that he would encounter a half-elf squad on his adventure and accept their request to delve further into the forest? Although he earned 100 gold and numerous spoils as a result, the initial task to collect Firefly Garlic Vine was now overdue. Last night, he even hurried back to the town overnight, hoping to submit the task quickly, but the association was already closed when he arrived, so he had to wait until now. Understood, thank you. Unexpectedly, the other party raised an eyebrow and glanced at him, adding, "I heard that, MS. Edwina's new detoxification potion is quite effective and is about to begin production of a second batch. You can go to her shop and ask. You might still have a chance." Hearing this, Xianen couldn't help but be stunned, then thought to himself. As far as he knew, the firefly garlic vine was not a common plant. Even if the other party no longer urgently needed it and was no longer paying a high price, selling it at market value could still fetch a good price. The girl's reminder gave him a second option. He couldn't help but express his gratitude. "Thanks for the reminder." He thought for a moment, then took out a shiny silver coin from his pocket, covered it with his fingertip, and silently placed it on the counter. Whoosh! In the blink of an eye, the silver coin had disappeared from sight. The girl, who seemed listless before, suddenly sat up straight, her half-closed eyelids raised, looking like a diligent employee. She muttered to herself, "MS. Edwina usually likes to drink stronger wine. Maybe you should take a couple of bottles over someday. She might even give me a discount on purchases." Her eyebrows raised slightly. Xianen nodded silently and turned to leave the counter. Tap! The sturdy leather boots landed on the stone-paved road of River Valley Town, emitting slightly muffled footsteps. Xianen carried the strong liquor, molten lava sai, he had just bought from White Sparrow Tavern for 2 silver coins. Standing on the bustling street, he looked towards the herbal medicine shop in front of him. The shop wasn't large, only half the size of Rockhammer, but the design was exceptionally exquisite. It seemed to mimic the style of the Adventurer Association close to Mist Forest, and the small house was built with dark oak from the forest, decorated with abundant green vines around it. If the association was like a giant treehouse, then the shop before him was like a large cluster of shrubs you'd find everywhere in the forest. A standing sign was placed in front of the shop, with a slanted drawing of a small iron cauldron being stirred by a spoon, filled with a green thick liquid, and next to it was written in universal language. Green grass cauldron. Organizing his thoughts, Xianen cleared his throat, pushed the door open, and entered. Ding dong. A light and pleasant bell chimed in his ears. A rich and slightly fresh herbal scent, mixed with the warm indoor air, wafted into his nostrils. The interior decor was also small and exquisite. A brownwood counter divided the space in two, with many bottles and jars lined on shelves on both sides. The goods for sale seemed similar to those in the alchemist shops in the association, but the prices were much cheaper. There were no healing potions, but there were many unknown tonic patches. Behind the counter, a slightly plump, curly-haired woman was intently stirring the cauldron before her. Occasionally, she dipped the iron spoon into the potion, seemingly checking its color. Hearing the door open, she unhurriedly, in a gentle voice, said, "Sorry, please wait a moment. I'll be right with you." Xianen was in no hurry. He gently placed the molten lava sai on the counter's surface, patiently waiting. About 2 minutes later, as the white steam rising from the cauldron grew denser, the woman stopped the continuous stirring motion, took out the spoon, and carefully covered the pot lid. She took a handkerchief from her waist and wiped her hands. Edwina turned around, just about to attend to the customer. She then noticed the bottle of liquor labeled with the White Sparrow Tavern in front of her on the table. Her eyes instantly lit up. Her gaze shifted to Xianen beside her, her tone becoming even softer as she asked, "Welcome to Green Grass Cauldron. Is there anything you need, customer?" Having already prepared what to say, Xianen replied, "Here's the thing. A few days ago, I took on the collection bounty for the Firefly Garlic Vine at the association, but by the time I returned to River Valley Town, I had already exceeded the task time limit. The staff at the association mentioned that you might still need Firefly Garlic Vine, so I thought I'd come by and try my luck." As he spoke, his eyes glanced at the molten lava sai in front of him. "Last night, I happened to try a nice drink at the inn, so I brought a bottle today. I'm not sure if it suits your taste." "Of course." Edwina smiled gently, taking the bottle. "Your thoughtfulness is appreciated. I do indeed need an extra batch of Firefly Garlic Vine. I was planning to go to the Adventurer Association in a few days to seek your help. If you have any extra, I can purchase it at the bounty price. He unloaded the backpack containing the firefly garlic vines from his back and handed it to the other party. A total of 32 clusters of firefly garlic vines, totaling 32 gold coins. Please keep it safe. Edwina handed Xia Nen a money bag with a green grass cauldron pattern on it. Feeling the heavy weight in his palm, the corners of his mouth slightly turned up with inner satisfaction. Suddenly, as if remembering something, Xianen took out a small cloth bag from his waist with faint green water stains on the surface. This is... The two frameless glasses perched on Edwina's nose reflected slightly under the sunlight coming through the window. A hint of surprise appeared on her plump and smooth face. Rusted monster? You've been to the dark territory? She carefully pinched the dark purple poison gland, placing it under the sunlight for a careful inspection. Faced with the shop owner's curiosity, Xia Nen did not answer, just winked at her silently. Oh, sorry. Realizing her gaffe, Edwina apologetically smiled and placed the confirmed poison gland back in the bag. After all, this thing can be quite dangerous for the average adventurer, and it's not exactly common here. Let's go with the market rate, 6 gold for poison glands in total for 24 gold. How about it? All right. Unsure of the exact market price, but since she said so, Xianan agreed without bargaining. His little treasury saw a significant increase. After completing the task, the time had already come to morning. The sun was blazing. Xianan walked down the street with a backpack, pondering in his heart. Next, I should deal with those miscellaneous items like the compasses I have on me. Before he met the half-elf and others, in the clearing where he discovered the firefly garlic vine, he also engaged in a battle with 2 unlucky adventurers. Except for the money bag that seemed to contain all their savings, 53 gold and 6 silver. The other weapons and armor were too heavy and naturally weren't brought back. But there were still some little things that vanished in the backpack. They should be enough to sell for a few meals worth of money. Unlike last time, where he had an unidentified malachite needing appraisal, Xianan's task this time hadn't yielded anything with an uncertain price. Therefore, instead of the rigorous and stingy fairy wind, he chose the more cost-effective Kukuner's grocery store. The store owner, Kukuner, was a rather cheerful dwarf. As soon as Xianan entered the shop, he enthusiastically introduced the business. And as mentioned in the Adventurer's Manual, the prices were quite fair. Just some scattered small items, yet they sold for 3 gold 7 silver. Originally 6 silver 5 copper, but Kukuner rounded it off. No wonder his business skills are ordinary, yet he is still noted in the manual. He's indeed generous. Xianan thought to himself. Thus, by this point, most of the loot he needed to sell that morning was completely dealt with. After the first task, due to the purchase of weapons and equipment, his treasury had severely shrunk, but now it had soared to an unprecedented level. From the duo of adventurers, 57 gold, 3 silver. Firefly garlic vine and rusted monster poison gland, 56 gold. Reward from the half-elf task, 100 gold. Plus his original savings of over 20 gold. Now Xianan's savings had astonishingly reached 236 gold, 2 silver, 7 copper. Although it's still only enough to buy half a bottle of light resistance potion or 1/7 of a heavy armor plate. But he was already very satisfied. After all, this was just the savings accumulated from 2 tasks. Xianan was even considering whether to buy another full bottle of healing potion for future needs. Right. Recalling the information he had gotten from Wood and the half-elf during the previous task. After completing the transaction, Xianan didn't leave the store directly. Instead, with a strong sense of purpose, he carefully scanned the shelves inside the grocery store. Customer, do you need anything? Seeing this, Coconer couldn't help but ask enthusiastically. Xiaonan hesitated slightly, then glanced at the empty doorway. Leaning closer, he tentatively asked, "Do you have any battle skill for sale in your shop?" "Of course." As soon as he finished speaking, the dwarf, who barely reached Xianan's thigh, patted his chest and replied loudly. He then suddenly ducked under the counter, making sounds of moving heavy objects. And then, bang! A huge cardboard box covered in dust was heavily thrown onto the counter by Coconer on his tiptoes. Cough! Cough, cough! Choking on the dust swirling in the air, he coughed while saying, "Battle skills, cough. They're all inside. 1 pound for 3 copper. If you buy 10 pounds, I'll give you a 30% discount. Heavy dance step slash. Royal cross." Xianan stared at the battle skill book in his hand, eyes wide as if he could see some magic flowers on the dust-covered book cover. "Where's my golden finger? Come on, do something." He concentrated all his attention, focused fully, but those familiar translucent characters didn't appear before his eyes as they usually did. Having been in this world for so many days, he has basically confirmed that his attribute panel golden finger is only effective for changes in weapon equipment and his own specialty attributes. But when he came to the general store with the hope of picking up a bargain, tried to use the golden finger to find a few usable battle skills, he came up empty-handed. He couldn't help but feel disappointed. Maybe it's because these are knockoffs, so I can't see the attributes? With a hint of consolation, Xia Nan murmured to himself. The air in the general store fell silent. Beside him, very considerately pretending to be busy with his own things, was Coconer, who was actually observing Xianan for quite some time out of the corner of his eye. His well-groomed face showed a touch of hesitation. His emerald green eyes glanced at the empty doorway of the general store, seeing that there was currently no one around. What he was about to say shouldn't offend the black-haired young man before him. He sorted out his wording again in his mind before slowly speaking. "Sir, judging by your attire, you should be a respectable adventurer. No offense, but judging from the price I offered, you can probably guess that the quality of these cheap goods is indeed varied. If it's just to take back for reference as a pastime, it's perfectly fine to buy a few books. But if you truly want to find those prerequisite battle skills necessary for professionals inside, even if your luck is good, it's indeed a bit difficult." Saying this, he seemed to think he was still being too blunt. The dwarf Coconer nervously fiddled with the buttons on his vest and added, "Mainly, I'm worried you might get hurt because many training methods in these battle skill books are not quite standardized. If you don't mind, I can give you a few books as a gift, but please don't practice them as genuine battle skills." Xianan naturally didn't feel any strange emotions towards the shopkeeper's reminder. He just shook his head with a smile, as if to indicate he was fine, while implicitly rejecting the offer. A few days ago, he learned some knowledge about battle skills from Wood and the half-elf. In a market where it's impossible to precisely distinguish real from fake, 99.99% of the so-called battle skills are traps that senselessly consume the time and energy of adventurers. The cost of trial and error is too high. A few months or even half a year could be wasted in the blink of an eye. If there are no other opportunities or the help of related professionals, wanting to master formal battle skills with just a simple skill book from a roadside general store is undoubtedly a pipe dream. Xianan asked Coconer for prices partly to test whether the golden finger could be effective and partly to see if he could try his luck. Now, the answer was clear, but leaving without buying even one book seemed a bit of a waste. Thinking for a moment, Xianan squatted down and picked out 2 battle skill books from a cardboard box. He shook off the dust by flicking the spine of the books in the air. "These 2 then, how much?" "No need, sir. Consider it a gift from me." "No problem." Not intending to owe such favors, and not wanting to take advantage of a few copper coins either. Xianan stuffed some copper coins into Coconer's hand and walked straight out of the general store. From countless novels he read in his past life, where the protagonist finds hidden treasures, he instinctively avoided the fancy-titled battle skill books thicker than half a finger. He chose the 2 thinnest, seemingly straightforward ones, Front Thrust and Block and Slash. He casually stacked them in his backpack. Xianan glanced at the bustling, lively street ahead and pondered. Well, next up, I should make a trip to the blacksmith shop. Being highly praised in River Valley Town, and even making it into the Adventurer's Manual, Rock Hammer is a fine blacksmith shop that could never be short of business. When Xiaonan arrived at the door with his backpack, the shop owner, Barn Steelbeard, was entertaining a middle-aged man with a simple appearance. He was holding a long-handled, double-handed weapon, inspecting it carefully from the butt end of the handle to the very tip of the weapon. He occasionally swung it a couple of times, seemingly testing its feel and weight. After a few price negotiations with Barn, he reluctantly counted out 4 gold coins, along with some loose silver and copper coins from his pouch, and handed them over with both hands. Of course, after the transaction was completed, the look of pain mingled with a touch of delight showed that this simple-faced, middle-aged man was extremely satisfied with the long-handled weapon in his hands. When he passed Xiaonan, he even nodded somewhat embarrassedly, as if apologizing for delaying his time. Just treating him as a passerby, Xiaonan nodded in return and then walked straight to Barn, the owner of Rockhammer. Oh, with just a glance, this burly man, who considered himself to have dwarf heritage but was a head taller than the bear goblins, recognized Xiaonan. However, compared to the changes that happened to the other person, his focus was slightly different. This mission was pretty dangerous, huh? Barn surveyed the ragged leather armor still stained with blood on Xiaonan with a meaningful sigh. After all, it was not long ago when he personally sold the leather armor to him, and its good quality for 10 gold was now in such condition. How could he not be concerned? Indeed, I encountered a tough opponent. It's thanks to your leather armor, or I might not have returned. Xiaonan didn't reveal specific information, just laughed it off with flattery. It was as if his words hit the spot, and the blacksmith shop was filled with Barn's hearty laughter. Haha, that's good. It's probably no longer wearable. Take it off, and I'll give you 3 silver coins for it. His expression was filled with pride and a sense of achievement. As a blacksmith with aspirations, having his forged items sell at a high price may attest to others' recognition of his skills. But what truly moved him was feedback like this after his equipment had been tested in real combat. Even if the meticulously forged equipment had turned to scrap, as long as it fulfilled its purpose and allowed its owner to stand safely before him. Barn felt happier than selling hundreds or even thousands of gold worth of goods. With his current battle-tested leather armor appearance, not to mention buying it back at a discount, even a roadside general store wouldn't take a look at it. Originally thought it could only be disposed of as scrap, yet he didn't expect it to fetch a price at Rockhammer, known for high-end products. Naturally, refusal wasn't an option. He immediately took it off and handed it to Barn in front of him. Speaking of which, this leather armor lived up to its high price of 10 gold. Faced with the impact from the petrified lizard, although it was shattered on the spot, without a doubt, it helped Xiaonan mitigate considerable damage. If the former self had been stingy and bought some cheaply made shoddy goods, he might not have even lasted until the half-elf and others arrived, directly crushed by the petrified lizard. 3 silver coins were pocketed. Barn Steelbeard, with his brown-red beard braided down to his chest, grinned as he stored the leather armor behind the counter. Out of the corner of his eye, a cold glint of iron gray flashed by. He couldn't help but look up, glancing at the beheading longsword behind Xiaonan, and tentatively asked, "How is this sword?" In response, Xiaonan didn't shy away and said bluntly, "It's excellent, sharp, and at the same time durable, much better than the weapon I used before." As he spoke, he observed the other's expression, trying to avoid revealing his golden finger, hinting slightly, "I wonder if it's because of the gray steel mixed in. I even feel this sword is tougher than other weapons." If you remember the details of the forging, maybe you could develop a good product. Upon hearing this, Barn's deep and straightforward laughter echoed in the blacksmith shop once more. His large palm slapped Xiaonan's shoulder with force. "Ha ha ha, you're too kind. But still, be careful not to suffer in combat because of this weapon." Obviously not understanding the meaning implied in Xiaonan's words. "Our blacksmith shop only makes fine products. This kind of equipment with uncertain quality details is impossible to mass produce. Moreover, even if I inadvertently made a fairly decent piece. Barnes' eyes glazed slightly, seeming to recall the scene of forging the beheading longsword. It would just be an unexpected small probability event, not replicable. With the words having reached this point, Xiaonan had nothing more to say. He nodded, drew the green pine wooden sword from his back, and handed it to the other party. I need you to customize a sword sheath for me. Price is negotiable. Barn accepted it with both hands, his gaze scrutinizing the blade, but didn't ask why someone would want to customize a sword sheath for a wooden sword. Merely flipping through and muttering to himself. Black-brown wooden material. Its toughness doesn't seem like ordinary wood. Is it iron oak from Ivlius or sparrow willow by Velvet Green Lake? No, the color shouldn't be this dark. Speaking, he took out measuring tools from the storage cabinet behind the counter, asking without lifting his head. Any specific requirements? Xiaonan pondered carefully for a moment. More durable, not too conspicuous in color, and with a slightly simple and low-key design. While the sword sheath itself may not be noticeable as a tool for holding the weapon during combat, an appropriate sword sheath is extremely important for adventurers. Beyond the widely recognized functions of protecting the blade, preventing rust and moisture, it can also somewhat affect the speed at which adventurers draw their sword and maintain balance in daily activities and combat. In a tavern, Xiaonan heard some drunks bragging that those high-level professionals with astonishing wealth would even spend a fortune hiring professional spellcasters to enchant their sword sheaths, granting them automatic maintenance, enhanced drawing speed, and other effects. Of course, that's still too far away for him right now. No need to think so much. Barn came from a dwarf clan, his skill level being one of the best in all of River Valley Town. In about 10 minutes, he finished measuring all sorts of data. Returning the wooden sword to Xiaonan, he said solemnly, even though the blade style is a bit unusual, making just a sheath isn't difficult. I plan to use rock carbon steel. Its color is close to the blade and won't be too conspicuous. Its moisture resistance is also good, suitable for this wooden material weapon. You can come pick it up in 3 days. With labor and material costs, customization is slightly more expensive. 10 gold. Deal. Xiaonan nodded. It was the same price as his previous leather armor and a necessary expense. Saving money on this would be compromising his own safety. Placing the wooden sword back on his back, Xiaonan's gaze moved to the various armors displayed on a nearby rack. Having completed the customization of the green pine sword sheath, he now needed to purchase a new set of armor for himself. Feeling the heavy weight of the money pouch at his waist, he secretly made up his mind, prepared for a considerable expense. The previous battle with the petrified lizard and the extreme pressure of Mist Forest environment made him acutely aware. To survive missions repeatedly, long-term, and safely as an adventurer, the margin for error must be increased. High offense and low defense might be an option for those professionals with sufficiently high killing power, but for low-level adventurers who haven't mastered several basic battle skills, excessively sacrificing defensive abilities to enhance their combat power is undoubtedly a trap that significantly increases the probability of death. Therefore, Xiaonan plans to purchase a set of armor that wouldn't drastically affect his agility while having a certain level of defensive strength. With regard to this, he had already made up his mind before his first visit to Rockhammer, where he bought the leather armor worth 10 gold. His gaze passed over the light armor, which was light enough but offered insufficient defense, through the heavy armor, which had strong defense but limited agility, and arrived at the middle of the shelf. Chain armor, medium armor, composed of metal rings intricately woven throughout a leather fabric, covered with a layer of soft fabric as decoration. Scale armor, medium armor, similarly uses leather as the foundation, with fish scale-like metal plates overlapping each other, also accompanying 2 leg guards, both priced at 50 gold. The former has stronger defense against slashing attacks, requires less maintenance, and produces less noise when moving, but its uneven weight distribution needs enough muscle strength to support, and its defense against blunt damage is weak. The latter offers better puncture resistance and a good performance against weapons like arrows and spears. has a larger coverage area, but higher maintenance costs, and is notably heavier overall. Clearly, while both sets of armor share the same price, they each have their pros and cons. For Xia Nan to select a set more suitable to him, he will need to consider his specific circumstances and proceed from practicality. After all, with his current physical strength, even with the Copperbone's specialty, he has a certain degree of physical damage reduction. But if he were to take a direct hit, as long as the attacker's weapon was sharp and forceful, he might not withstand it. A suitable set of armor can be said to be a second life for low-level adventurers. Therefore, upon realizing he was unable to make the correct choice between the two sets of medium armor, he immediately did something about it. Xianan proactively sought the advice from Barn, the owner of the nearby blacksmith shop, about the strengths and weaknesses of the two sets of equipment and asked for his suggestion. First of all, the weight aspect is something you need to consider. Barn directed his gaze at Xianan, smoothing the braid on his chest. Although they're the same type, scale armor is overall heavier. Defense performance is indeed important, but it shouldn't impair your normal mobility. To this, Xianan forcefully agreed. Upon receiving Barn's approval, he tried both sets of armor on. They did not impede him. Now, his physical attributes make the weight of such medium armor feel only slightly heavier compared to the leather armor he bought before his second mission, far from the point of affecting his daily actions. Then, you must consider your actual situation, Barn reminded. If you're primarily taking on bounty missions from the Association, targeting various types of bandits and thieves, I'd recommend scale armor. After all, it covers a wide area and can effectively block attacks from arrows and spears, which is especially useful when fighting sentient beings. He spoke while glancing at the beheading longsword behind Xianan. But if you're usually relying on hunting demons in the Mist Forest, then chain armor is obviously more suitable. It makes less noise when moving, making you less likely to attract attention from demons, and its relatively simple structure makes maintenance easy, even if you're in the forest for half a month, without worrying about its defense degrading significantly. After Barnes' explanation, the originally indecisive Xia Nan suddenly became clear in heart. Rather than fighting devious bandits who use traps and sinister tools, he was more inclined to deal with the green-skinned goblins in the Mist Forest, which he could take down with a single cut. Chain armor it is. No packaging was necessary. The worn-out leather armor was already sold to him. After paying with gold coins, he directly put on the chain armor, feeling the unique weight of metal against his skin. Xianan felt a faint sense of security inexplicably emerging from his heart. If not considering dodging, forcibly taking a hit-for-hit trade-off, I wonder how many hits I could withstand from bear goblins. He pondered to himself. Having completed the armor upgrade, Xianan did not leave Rockhammer. He still had one most important issue to address. This is... Barnes' eyes widened in surprise as he looked at the dark scale, reflecting a faint light under the sunlight, his rugged face showing a hint of amazement. Years of forging experience allowed him to immediately recognize it as a scale armor from some kind of demon, but ding! A delicate small hammer gently tapped the surface of the scale, eliciting a crisp sound like metal clashing. Even though he hadn't examined and tested it thoroughly, his rough hands, which have touched countless forging materials, could feel the astonishing hardness and toughness emanating from the scale's surface. "Where did you?" Barn instinctively raised his head, glancing at the black-haired youth in front of him, parted his mouth, then abruptly stopped halfway through his sentence. He swallowed back the question that was on the tip of his tongue. In this line of work, especially when the client is an adventurer, it's better to say less. "So, if I were to use this scale as the main material, could you craft a piece of equipment?" Xia Nen kept a composed expression while inquiring. He certainly hadn't forgotten about the snake scale he discovered in a cave. In fact, it was arguably even higher in priority in his mind than sword sheaths or armor. After all, back then he exerted all his strength and even used Vortex Slash, yet couldn't leave a scratch on that giant snake. Its unimaginably exaggerated defense performance made him ponder how to utilize it to create a suitable piece of equipment almost as soon as he returned to River Valley Town. "Hold on a moment," Let me study it. Entering his professional domain, Barnes' expression turned immediately serious. Suppressing his inner curiosity, he held up the snake scale to catch the sunlight outside the shop and squinted slightly. Perhaps it could be embedded in the center of the chest armor as critical defense. Thus, although modeled by an armor plate, it could also reduce weight. But it seems somewhat underutilized, or perhaps cut into pieces and crafted into a scale armor. Its edge sharpness is also quite good, maybe small weapons like a dagger or a short sword. No, that's too wasteful. Suddenly, staring at the long rhomboid shape, wide on both sides and narrow in the middle, a bright idea struck Barnes. With a craftsman's unique enthusiasm, he asked, "Arm shield. How about an arm shield?" Saying this, he quickly walked to the shelves and pulled out a beautifully designed, silver-shining metal round shield. Just like this. Of course, if crafted with this scale as the main material, the arm shield shape wouldn't be round, and the color would differ. Hearing this, Xiaonan couldn't help but be moved. He has some understanding of defensive tools like arm shield, generally a small shield worn on the arm. It's compact and lightweight, so even though he uses a beheading longsword, which requires a two-handed grip, in combat it generally wouldn't be a hindrance. During defense, the arm shield can be moved to the front, and meanwhile, he could seize opportunities to attack with the other hand. To some extent, it also prevents those moments where he had to use the sword to block attacks. In short, given the long rhomboid structure of the snake scale and his combat style, crafting it into an arm shield seems like the best choice. All right, let's go with the arm shield, he nodded to Barnes. However, Barnes' expression seemed somewhat regretful. It's a pity. Recently, the association's orders have been quite many, with many materials already used up. Otherwise, given the strength of your scale, if checked carefully, perhaps we could even craft some magic equipment. Magic equipment. Xiaonan was instantly taken aback, then quickly realized. No problem, I can wait. How much would it cost? Facing Xianan's inquiry about the price, his face, dense with hair due to his dwarf lineage, first showed a hint of hesitation. Then he politely and subtly shifted his gaze from the black-haired young man in front of him to the last item on the shelf, a full-body heavy armor marked with a price of 1,500 gold. He slowly began. Actually, my suggestion is to first process this scale simply, and on the premise of preserving its integrity as the main material, forge a temporary arm shield. This way, not only can you use it for emergencies now, but in the future, when you have the means for higher-grade equipment, you can easily separate the scale from the arm shield. What do you think? Barnes spoke very tactfully. Xiaonan understood what he meant. In summary, just 4 words. No money, don't touch. He was a reasonable person and naturally wouldn't, because of these as subtle as possible words, feel looked down upon and start a fight. Objectively, his current savings for ordinary people in this world might be enough for many years of expenses. But in the line of adventurers, where supernatural powers exist, it's only enough to buy a few potions. Not a complete waste. At least from Barnes' demeanor, he learned that a magic equipment piece with special effects like his Deadline and Green Pine, with a green quality and above, should be priced at a level similar to the 1,500 gold full-body heavy armor, if not higher. Then let's make a transitional arm shield for now, the kind that preserves the main material's integrity. How much would that cost? After such an interruption, Xiaonan, who originally felt his small treasury was quite considerable, felt unsteady. His tone also softened as a result. Fortunately, if it's just an ordinary whiteboard equipment, its price is still within the income range of low-level adventurers. Barn, while examining the snake scale in his hand and considering potential expenses, said, "Although it's a temporary transition, I definitely can't give you those cheap auxiliary materials. Battle equipment must guarantee strength. The shape of this scale is special, and it's a custom order. We don't have the corresponding mold in the shop, so labor costs might be slightly higher. Added up in total, 35 gold. I'll give you a small discount." Upon hearing this, Xiaonan immediately breathed a sigh of relief. It was a bit more expensive than expected, but still within an acceptable range. So he nodded in agreement and paid the deposit. Afterward, Barn was also very professional, earnestly discussing the specifics of the arm shield with him and measuring various data of his arm. Perhaps thinking his previous comments about magic equipment were inappropriate, and considering the customer in front of him had just spent nearly 100 gold in the store, the owner of the Rock Hammer, known for his excellent reputation in the Adventurer's Manual, hesitated while measuring Xianan's arm. He slowly began, "I have a batch of goods to deliver to Callanforce soon. It's about a 4 to 5 day journey round trip from River Valley Town to there. The caravan is resting in the town and is recruiting guards. If you have time, help me deliver it, and I can reduce some labor costs and give you another discount. When you return, the arm shield should be almost ready. How about it?" Xianan didn't agree, although he thought that, as a low-level adventurer who hadn't even reached a professional level, he should probably hunt more goblins and take on some classic errands like this. But after just returning from Mist Forest, without having had a proper warm meal for a few times, going on another errand seemed a bit rushed. Previously, thinking it was just a simple herbal collection on the outskirts, he had been dragged by the half-elf to spend many days in the forest, almost losing his life. To venture out again now, called a caravan guard, who knows what he might encounter, having finally escaped his previous 996 blessing of constant work and come to this other world. Can't he enjoy a few days of leisure? Moreover, Xianan is currently waiting for the half-elf's reply, at least until he knows when the battle skill master they've contacted will be available to come to River Valley Town. He plans to make further plans only then. During this time, Xianan also wondered if he could practice the 2 suspected battle skills he had. If he really manages to hone them into 1 or 2 moves, and then learns the formal battle skills taught by that professional, along with the already full-level Vortex Slash, then he would truly meet the 3 conditions to become a professional. Thinking this way, Xianan declined. Barn wasn't angry, just patted him on the shoulder and said with a laugh, "No worries, the caravan will be staying in town for several days anyway. It's never too late if you change your mind later." Wearing brand new chain armor, Xianan, with dual swords on his back, walked out of the blacksmith shop. By then, the spoils from this mission had mostly been dealt with. The specialty of copper bones, 3 points of constitution attribute, this kind of implicit enhancement needn't be elaborated. In terms of equipment, the green pine, a wooden sword offering damage bonuses against undead creatures and snake and scorpion, along with a set of excellent defensive chain armor, boosted his overall combat power to a new level. The initially thinned wallet, after spending at the blacksmith shop, still left him with a substantial 140 plus gold. Even if he spends his days lazing around, doing nothing, he could stay in an inn with good living conditions for over half a year. Standing on the street, Xianan felt his initially burdened heart, along with the backpack that no longer weighed him down after dealing with the spoils, both become lighter. The busy day had finally ended. Let's take a few days off first. Xianan thought to himself this way. During this period, you might look around to see if there's anywhere selling throwable items like burning bombs. That oil powder bomb Wood threw at the scorpions during the previous mission left a deep impression on him. On future adventures, such tools could prove remarkably effective. Practicing the 2 battle skills, as well as not forgetting Vortex Slash, though it's already at full level, who knows if this world has some breakthrough advancement settings. Practicing more can only be beneficial. For supplies, there's no rush. He can purchase what he needs before the next mission. The sky gradually darkened. In the depths of the purple-red sunset were the curling smoke rising from the town. Xia then slowly exhaled a long breath. For dinner, maybe mushroom soup again. To be honest, it's actually quite tasty. In the woods near River Valley Town, the morning breeze, laced with a hint of chill, swept through, causing the oak branches to sway and the lush green leaves to rub against each other, producing a gentle sasha sound. Leaves leisurely fell, swirling and floating down. Whoosh! A burst of dark brown gleam suddenly erupted from somewhere beneath the tree, vanishing in an instant. Incredibly precise. The leaf, floating unpredictably under the influence of the invisible air currents, was spinning in the air one moment. The next moment, it was pinned straight to the rough tree trunk by a warm yet sharp sword tip. Swish! The powerful force transmitted from the sword made the towering oak seem as if it had suffered a heavy blow. The tree trunk shook violently, shedding countless leaves. With effort, the sword tip was pulled out from the tree trunk. Xianin casually flicked a sword flower and sheathed the wooden sword behind him. Now, since he returned to River Valley Town after completing the task, another 15 days had passed. To some extent, these days were almost the most relaxing and joyful time since he crossed into this world. While sleeping, he didn't have to worry about being clubbed in the head by a green-skinned rat popping out from nowhere. While walking, he didn't have to fear suddenly being turned into a stone statue. Every day he ate and drank at the inn, not exactly a feast every meal, but far more comfortable than living in the wild. Of course, he hadn't retired yet. Xianin certainly couldn't completely slack off. While relaxing body and mind, he also proceeded with the plan he previously laid out in an orderly manner. First of all, the green pine sword sheath he had ordered from the blacksmith was completed. Made of rock carbon steel, it's entirely ash black, simple and low-key. While fitting snugly the sword, it also effectively disguised the material of the wooden sword. Every detail perfectly met the requirements he had previously put forward. Xianin was very satisfied with this. It's worth mentioning that during this period of adjustment, he also gained a certain understanding of the only blue equipment he had on him. In terms of sharpness, green pine was slightly inferior to the beheading longsword, merely the level of ordinary metal weapons. In terms of sturdiness, it wasn't particularly outstanding either, although he didn't test it under high intensity due to concerns about damaging the blade. But the feel from use seemed only slightly better than ordinary standard weapons. It's apparent that the reason green pine could reach the blue rare quality on the attribute panel was due to its 2 damage entries against undead creatures and snake and scorpion type enemies. In other situations, Xianin still used the beheading longsword as his main weapon. Then there were those 2 battle skills. How to say this? While it wasn't to the extent of having gained nothing, the progress was not quite satisfactory either. He had good aptitude, proven in both actual combat and battle skill training. The 2 battle skills, front thrust and block and slash, he picked up very quickly. Within just half a day, the training methodologies recorded on that thin piece of paper were firmly mastered by him. But strangely, unlike the feeling during practice of Vortex / ingrained in muscle memory from his predecessor, where every move was mechanically precise and stable. While training these 2 battle skills, Xianin always found something odd. Either the force was too brief, lacking explosiveness, or the balance was unstable, causing the body to tremble. Every training session brought new issues. The key was that he couldn't find an appropriate method to solve them. After finally correcting the initial flaws through extensive practice, new problems emerged, rendering previous practices futile. It was like plugging holes, one after another, never to be fully resolved. This made Xiaonan wonder if these seemingly simple battle skills were actually those dubious goods circulating in the market. Not certain. After all, his predecessor also trained day and night, diligently for years, to almost reach full level of Vortex Slash. Let's practice diligently for a while longer, Xiaonan thought in his heart. If things remain this way after some time, I'll try switching to 2 different ones. Having concluded the morning's training, Xiaonan didn't head back to the inn right away, but took a detour to the Rock Hammer blacksmith shop. Ding! The metallic hammer struck heavily upon the heated, melted steel. Muscular biceps swelled and pulsated, as sweat accompanied by sparks flew off like stardust. Hiss! Thick smoke rose as the red-hot iron was submerged in water, producing a piercing sound. Not until the entire process finished did the brawny man finally take a breath. Your arm shield should be ready in about 7 or 8 days. Sorry, I've got a lot of orders on my end. They're all customers who paid good gold coin, so I can't really cut in line. It's all right, you take care of your work. I'm not in a hurry. He didn't mean to rush him anyway. The other person had previously told him that the snake scale arm shield is different from a sword sheath. Its shape is special, and without a mold, it requires custom work, which might be slower to complete. Xiaonan came just to check the progress and confirm the timeline. Now that Barn is given a rough time frame, he decided not to nag, greeted him, and was about to leave. He didn't expect that before leaving, the other party called out to him again. How's your consideration on the caravan escort task? Barn took a few gulps of water and asked. The departure is in a few days if you want to join. Just say the word, and I'll slip you in. Of course, if you're busy, there's no pressure. It's up to you. Xiaonan hesitated slightly. The day after tomorrow. I'll give you a definite answer the day after tomorrow. All these days past, the caravan escort has been mostly recruited. With or without him, it didn't make much difference. He didn't intend to string the other party along deliberately. After all, the most important thing now is that the half-elf hasn't replied to him yet. Xiaonan was unsure when the professional contacted by Haiyan would arrive in River Valley Town. Without a fixed time, he was afraid of missing it, so he didn't dare to leave town easily. Now that half a month has passed, if there's no reply in these 3 days, he'll simply decline the escort job and wait patiently in River Valley Town. This way, he wouldn't delay others' caravan work, and he would just earn a few fewer gold coins, which he can accept. Upon exiting the blacksmith shop, it was already noon. Xiaonan returned to the White Sparrow Tavern, planning to have lunch first, take a nap if needed, and then continue training in the afternoon. The classic combo of mushroom soup, stew, and white bread was still the order. However, the portion sizes between the dishes were significantly more than before. This was because he spent extra to purchase more. The enhancement of his physical condition increased his appetite accordingly. With the white bread, he stuffed a large piece of stew in his mouth. Accompanied by the rich, savory taste, the juicy and tender meat was easily chewed and swallowed, turning into a warm stream providing energy to his robust body. Even though Xiaonan didn't have a clear sense of his current physical strength, he could definitely say that the physique, which surged by 3 points after absorbing that droplet of golden dew, provided an all-around boost to his body. Yes, an all-around boost. Even if the strength and agility on the attribute panel were still at 6 points, reached after Vortex Slash reached full level. He could clearly feel that after returning to town this time, his explosive power and muscle strength had increased. Clearly, the attributes on the golden finger panel are not independent and distinctly differentiated types, as in the game. In this real world, increasing a single attribute point likely brings about a more complex change to the entire body. For example, if one day, Xiaonan's strength attribute suddenly increased by a point, then correspondingly, his muscle explosiveness would also increase to some extent. And the increase in muscle explosiveness would mean he could gain even faster movement speed. So to some extent, could it not also be considered that his agility attribute had been enhanced too? In a fantasy world with a Middle Ages backdrop, lacking the scientific testing of modern society, Xiaonan could only speculatively guess the changes in his body through his practical experiences. Creak. The liquid with floating foam swayed gently as the wooden mug was pushed in front of Xiaonan. Your wheat beer. The tavern owner, Chapton, reminded him. Chewing his food, Xiaonan nodded slightly. Tap. A snow-white envelope was placed on the table by Chapton, who handed it over. It arrived this morning, with your name written on it. Is it yours? Xiaonan's eyes suddenly lit up, and he swallowed the food in his mouth. Yes, it is. Thank you. Accepting the envelope, his eyes glanced over its surface. There weren't any extra decorations, only the recipient's address and Xiaonan's name marked at the lower right corner. Is it the Haiyan family's emblem? Xiaonan speculated in his heart. Just as he was about to open the envelope, a sudden noise erupted in the tavern hall beside him. He frowned and looked over. Two familiar figures came into view. Bernie, this drunkard, who almost forced him to draw his sword when he first returned to the town, later identified himself through the tavern owner and patrons. Recently, it seemed he no longer had money for drinks and was out on missions with his team, nowhere to be seen. Xiaonan couldn't be bothered to look for trouble with him. Yet now, he was causing another scene. The subject of his dispute, the honest-looking, plainly dressed middle-aged man, also looked familiar to him. It seems like I had a brief encounter with him the day I went to the blacksmith shop to order a sword sheath. Xiaonan pondered internally. Before him, the situation was escalating further. Seeing the man was a new face in town. Bernie, face flushed, reeking of alcohol, leaned in and muttered something incomprehensible. The plain man, eating the cheapest meal, immediately had a fallen expression. However, he didn't reply, just buried his head and quickened his eating pace, seemingly trying to avoid direct conflict. Noticing this, Bernie showed no intention of holding back. Instead, his emotions ran high as he loudly spouted some indecent country slang. His alcohol-numbed nerves made him unable to maintain his balance. As he flailed around, his foot slipped, and he fell backward. His arm instinctively sought support, slamming onto the neighboring table's surface. Bang! Food and drink spilled all over the ground. Xiaonan immediately withdrew his gaze, for he saw clearly at the very moment Bernie overturned the neighboring drinking table. The thin young man sitting beside, who was merely watching the commotion while drinking, suffered undeservedly. His figure suddenly twisted, as if teleporting away from his spot. The splattered booze didn't touch him at all. A professional, Xiaonan confirmed in his heart. Bam! With limbs twisted, having lost consciousness, Bernie was thrown into the street, passed out, as if he were a dead pig. The thin young man amicably asked the surrounding patrons the name of Bernie's team, left a few silver coins, and leisurely strolled out of the tavern. Meanwhile, the honest and plain middle-aged man swiftly cleaned up the last bits of food on his plate and hurriedly left. The drunkard, in the end, still provoked someone he shouldn't have. Xiaonan shook his head. Speaking of which, if it weren't for Bernie's two teammates being present that night, he might have dealt with him already, not needing a professional to intervene. He drank the last bit of ale from his cup in one gulp. No longer paying attention to the noisy and bustling tavern hall, he returned to his room and opened the envelope sent by the half-elf. Long time no see, Xiaonan. First, I must apologize for replying so late. It's not procrastination, just that family matters have entangled me, leaving me unable to get away until today when I finally had a brief respite. Since the day we parted, to the time I wrote this letter, it's been over half a month, and I don't know if you're still in River Valley Town or have embarked on a new adventure. Regarding the commission for the Battle Skill Master, I was lucky to contact an experienced professional through family connections. He will pass through River Valley Town in Mid-Sun Month, Leezy at the earliest, and will stay briefly, during which you can learn battle skills from him. See the attachment to the letter for detailed information. No need to reply. I might have difficulty receiving it. Also, I wish you to become a professional soon. May the stars shine upon you. Your friend, Haiyan. Xiaonan's gaze swept over the fluent and rhythmically signed-off letter by the half-elf at the end. He pondered in his mind. As the letter mentioned, that professional would arrive in River Valley Town no earlier than Mid-Sun Month. Yet currently, it was only the beginning of the blossoming month. Referring to this continent's calendar, there was even an entire Xia dynasty month in between. Nearly 70 days. He had ample time on his hands. Honestly, the consecutive adventures in the Mist Forest, with its dangerous and high-pressure environment, made Xianan feel a subtle resistance deep in his heart. He didn't fancy going back there in the short run. In this case, finding guard work with a caravan to take a breather and wander to the neighboring town for a few days seemed like a good option. It had not only earned him some extra cash to cover daily expenses, but also let him experience the local customs and culture of the world. Most importantly, what changed his mind was the bottleneck he hit in battle skill training recently. Recalling the past, the predecessor spent countless days and nights, many years to train Vortex/ to LV4 98/100. Yet, since he just crossed into this world, in just a few days he filled the last 2 hardest points of skill level before full level. The difference between the two and what it meant. Xiana had a few thoughts in mind. Seizing this opportunity, he planned to verify his assumptions. A small town near River Valley Town. No different from countless other obscure, small human settlements within the Sevia Kingdom. The river is short and shallow, far from meeting the conditions for navigation, only enough for the town's women to wash clothes and dump dirty water. It doesn't produce any rare specialties, nor has any large mineral veins been found nearby to support the entire town's economy. Even due to its proximity to the Mist Forest, the wilderness near the town has a denser number of demons than other areas, making the passage of caravans particularly dangerous. In a certain sense, if the area around River Valley Town didn't have that perfect terrain surrounded by mountains on 3 sides, easy to defend and hard to attack, a bit further from the Mist Forest, Kalanfor would be as it is now. Fortunately, it is because of having a place like River Valley Town with an adventurer association that provides the royal provinces with a large amount of tax revenue every year as an adventuring hub. Kalanfor, which surrounds it like a satellite city, can leech off it, bearing the suffix town instead of village, without completely falling into decline. The round trip to River Valley Town is only 4 or 5 days, and the surrounding terrain is relatively flat, making it a temporary resting place for many adventurers and caravans. Unashamedly, 70% of Kalanfor's annual tax revenue comes from generous adventurers passing through the town. But on the other hand, it's like a delightful treat that invisibly affects one's health. Those walking on the edge of a knife, with considerable incomes accompanied by great risks, needing to release their inner pressures in various ways after each mission. While offering a promising future to the town, it also breeds countless filths in the shadows. The west side of Kalanfor, at the end of a slightly deserted street, is a small tavern named Full Bag of Gold. A modest name with a sign featuring a bag full of gold coins. While expressing the tavern owner's good wishes, it also subtly reveals its secondary functions. Clatter, clatter. In the air filled with alcohol and hormones was the crisp sound of the dice jar shaking. The softly yellowish light, along with the warmth of the burning fireplace, makes one unconsciously sink into it, like a winter morning's bed. The tavern hall, which should be spacious and bright, becomes narrow and cramped due to the dense crowd before the gambling tables. It also makes it a place of fervor and excitement. Unlike Noom, those big cities full of nobles and learned intellectuals, Kalanfor doesn't have expensive, large racetracks demanding massive investments for construction and maintenance, nor do many have the patience to indulge in a game of fanciful and complex dragon chess. These low-level adventurers only use the simplest, most direct means to vent their greed in endless stimulation and gambling. 4 or 5 to... Tim stared intently at the dice in front of him on the table, with a look of focus on his sweat-drenched face that he hadn't shown even years ago facing that Knoll hunter in the wilderness. 11 fuck. His cursing, full of dissatisfaction and with no intention of lowering the volume, dissolved like a drop in the ocean amid the surrounding noisy gamblers. The coins that were originally his were mercilessly taken away. Tim touched his somewhat deflated wallet at his waist with a hesitant look. As a former adventurer, the high-risk, high-reward work allowed him to save a considerable sum in just over a decade. Even without any income now, he could live a decent life in Calenfor with this money, maybe even live out his old age peacefully. However, the income far surpassing that of ordinary citizens from his adventuring days and the bad habits developed under high pressure had long accustomed him to extravagant spending and living in a drunken stupor in taverns. In just a few years' time, the savings that could have provided a comfortable life for a whole family was squandered away. Currently, he is no wealthier than an ordinary porter in the city. "Hey, Dunn, is it my turn?" Behind him, the gamblers eagerly waiting in line were impatiently urging. Tim turned around abruptly, his reddened eyes displaying a fierce look only seen when fighting demons. "What are you rushing for?" Scram! The displeased commotion instantly vanished, replaced by the figure of someone shrinking their head and seeking another table, with a faint sound of grumbling complaints.